Hey, happy Easter Monday, everybody. Hope wherever you are in the world, you're doing well. Of course, the biggest news story in the world right now is the death of Pope Francis, who has died at age 88. I'm going to be covering that shortly. I'm going to be talking about my own experience of being a Catholic and meeting other people who horrible things happened at the hands of Catholic priests. And what I learned over the years that the church was housing one of the biggest PDF rings in the world. We'll get to that. I've just emailed Kevin Annett, who we've been working with for about 5 years on this channel, who has done tons of research on the Pope and the Vatican and is absolutely fascinating to listen to. He's extremely well educated and he talks at a very fast pace. And he's had several attempts on his life. So the structure is I'm going to talk about the news, then what I learned about the Catholic Church, the PDFs, and then we'll go over to some of the stuff I've done in the past with Kevin Annett. And I'm going to try and get Kevin Annett back on tonight. He's not been on for a while. So the news is Pope Francis dies aged 88. And there are updates and reactions coming out every minute. He was born Jorge Mario Bergoglio in Buenos Aires. He became the first Latin American pontiff in history when he was elected to the papacy in 2013. So he's had quite a good run. Last month, he was discharged from Rome's hospital after a 38-day stay following a respiratory crisis that developed into double pneumonia. Well, we've come across the old pneumonia thing a lot, haven't we, with the Diddy case? And it shouldn't be fatal for younger people, as we saw in the Diddy case. But if you're getting up there, if you're an octogenarian, then it's serious. So his death was confirmed just hours after a much hoped for appearance at St. Peter's Square on Easter Sunday. And the Vatican is preparing the first rituals following his death. And if you've just tuned in, thank you for tuning in. We're going to be talking about the Pope, what we've learned about the Catholic Church, and then going over to some Kevin Annett stuff. I'm sure many of you remember us having Kevin Annett on the Kamloops school stuff, the missing Native American kids, the royal family, etc. All right, so the body of the Pope is expected to be transferred within the course of the day to the chapel of the Domus Santa Marta Hotel where he lived, so that Vatican officials can pay their final respects. There, the head of the Vatican Health Services examines the body, ascertains the cause of death, and writes a report which is expected late today. The body rests in the Pope's personal chapel for the ritual pronouncement of death, presided over by the Vatican official who runs the Holy See administration between the death or resignation of one pope and the election of another. For the public, the Cardinal Archpriest of St. Peter's Basilica, Cardinal Mauro Gambetti, is expected to lead a recitation of the Rosary Prayer in St. Peter's Square later on Monday. And let's just have a quick look at how you guys are doing in the chat. Thank you for tuning in, everybody. Let's have a look what people are saying. So, do you think then that the Pope's death is suspicious? Put a 1 in the chat. If you think it's perfectly normal, put a 2 in the chat. Let me get your thoughts. And yep, Good morning, Lorraine, BMC, Graciela, Sean, I made it. Good day from Melbourne. Yeah, this is quite an early one for me, isn't it? Usually we're streaming at night for the Americans. Please try to get Dr. Taylor Marshall. He wrote a book about the infiltration of the Vatican. Has a YouTube channel with over 1 million subs. Would love to. I'm going to reach out to Taylor Marshall when I finish this. Thank you. Why are people in shock? The man was 88 and had been in poor health for a few months. That's from Elaine. Martin saying the worst pope so far. Well, that's a debate, isn't it? He wasn't Methodist, Patricia says. CL, he's been dead for a while. They've been holding back the news till after Easter. Let's see. Open the vaults of the Vatican, Catholicism, the Roman Empire that never died, indeed. Fascinating history, isn't it? The decline and fall of the Roman Empire and the continuation of the church. Benjamin says the Vatican is overrun by beep. I found out from a guy that had to quit after being accosted in the shout in the Vatican while trying to become a priest. And we know this from some of our guests. Looks like a few people are suspicious. We've got some twos, few ones. Old Papa, we got a 3. I knew he was going to die, says Stacy. Saw him on TV meeting the king and queen, had a feeling, telling me he was going to die. Obviously, I didn't believe the feeling I had. So he had the aura of death, basically. You're able to sense that over time. Yes, it's full of PDFs, but there's a lot of decent priests, says Marie. It's the cover-ups that get me terrible. It affects every religion. Honest to God, Sean, they are everywhere. It's disgusting, isn't it? Makes me not want to let baby Ziggy out of the house. Where can you go? That look tells me everything I need to know. When you are able to see, you can't unsee. What you're able to see, you can't unsee. Yeah, that's so true. All right, let me continue with the news. Reactions are coming in from all over the world. And let's see, Emmanuel Macron, the French president, said, from Buenos Aires to Rome, Pope Francis wanted the church to bring joy and hope to the poorest, to unite people with one another and with nature. May this hope be reborn endlessly beyond him to all Catholics, to a grieving world. My wife and I send our thought. Next, I just learned of the passing of Pope Francis. My heart goes out to the millions of Christians all over the world who loved him. I was happy to see him yesterday, though he was obviously very ill. But I'll always remember him for the below homily he gave in the very early days of COVID. It was really quite beautiful. May God rest his soul. Wasn't he a big proponent of the jab, the Pope? I think if I remember back, he was all over the jab. So let's go. Let's see the next one. Turkish president, leader of the Christian Democratic Union. All right, so Vatican suspends ceremony to create the first millennial saint. The Vatican has suspended, due to Pope Francis's death, a planned ceremony for the Catholic Church to proclaim the first saint from the millennial generation. Carlos Acutis, an Italian boy who died from leukemia in 2006 at the age of 15, was set to be made a saint at a ceremony in St. Peter's Square. The Pope had a worldwide impact on all peoples. London churchgoers react to the Pope's death. Cathedral staff set up an image of Pope Francis inside Westminster Cathedral. 88 is too young, some people are saying. Let's see. Churchgoers at Westminster Cathedral in central London are paying tribute to the Pope at the Easter Monday service today. Father Patrick van der Vost, leading the service, said it was symbolic that he died on Easter Monday. He was always there to serve the poor. Barbara Keeley, Labour peer and former frontbench MP, told the PA News Agency after the Mass. During a time of war in the world, the Pope was a voice for peace and support those who are suffering. Parishioner Patrick Somerville, 87 from Westminster, said, he has had a worldwide impact on all leaders and all peoples. I spoke this morning to my news agent who told me his mother, who is a Hindu, loved Pope Francis, and I think that says it all. He brought love to the whole world in a humble way. Putin and Zelensky pay tribute to Pope Francis. Zelensky has joined world leaders in paying tribute. So as does Putin. Two countries may be at war, but they have both said nice things about the pontiff. Zelensky says his country grieves together with Catholics and all Christians who look to Francis for spiritual support. He knew how to give hope, ease suffering through prayer, and foster unity. He prayed for peace in Ukraine and for Ukrainians. Eternal memory. That's from Zelensky. Putin noted the Pope's international clout as a consistent defender of the high values of humanism and justice. He said that the Pope actively encouraged the development of a dialogue between the Russian Orthodox and the Roman Catholic churches, as well as constructive interaction between Russia and the Holy See. So the worshippers in St. Peter's Square have been giving their reaction following the death, with one describing how it was almost a miracle that he made it to Easter Sunday. The Pope spent 38 days in hospital earlier this year after the respiratory illness developed into double pneumonia. And he left hospital last month, but had commitments scaled down ahead of Easter celebrations. Sister Monica Gonzalez, who was visiting from Mexico, called Francis's death a great loss for the church and for the whole world. A pope who works so hard for peace and for the good of all. Let's all pray for him. Eva Bonanno, that sounds like a mafia name, doesn't it? From Philadelphia, called it a very sad day. It is honestly impressive, I think, that he made it to Easter. I think that it's almost like a miracle for Italy. Johann Xavier said he had traveled from Australia hoping to see the Pope during his visit. But then we heard about it when we came in here. It's pretty much devastated all of us. It is really sad. So you may be wondering, what were the last words from the Pope during his final act of devotion on Easter Sunday? He wished a happy Easter to everyone in his final act that saw him heavily supported by his aides. He delighted a crowd of 35,000 faithful at the Vatican yesterday with an appearance on the balcony at St. Peter's Basilica. He appeared weary and fatigued. He needed help from his aides while he sat on the balcony and watched Easter blessings, was read aloud by a senior cardinal. Aides were seen adjusting his papal robes and helping him drink water through a straw as his blessing was delivered. He didn't celebrate the Easter Mass in the piazza yesterday, instead delegated it to Cardinal Angelo Comastri, the retired Archpriest of St. Peter's Basilica. He left hospital under protected discharge on March 23rd after suffering an infection that developed into pneumonia in both lungs earlier this year. During the service on Easter Sunday, he raised his left hand towards a crying boy. And that was the moment he gave his last public blessing as he drove through St. Peter's Square for the last time. He blessed 4 tiny babies and 2 older children during the circuit in his Pope-mobile, through cheering crowds gathered to celebrate Easter Sunday, while the youngsters passed up to him by members of his security detail. The outing was the longest time he had spent in public since spending 5 weeks in hospital being treated for double pneumonia. Earlier, he appeared on the Vatican balcony and told crowds, "Brothers and sisters, happy Easter," before an aide read the rest of his annual Urbi et Orbi blessing and speech, which called for an end to the wars in Ukraine and Gaza. And there was an Irish-born cardinal who broke news of the Pope's death. He announced to the world that Pope Francis had died. That's Cardinal Kevin Farrell, 77. He confirmed the death after bouts of ill health. Cardinal Farrell is Camerlengo of the Holy Roman Church, a key role during sede vacante, the period when the church is without a pope. Kevin Joseph Farrell, born in Dublin in 1947, lived in Galtimore Park in Dublin. After finishing primary and secondary school, he attended the University of Salamanca in Spain and the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome before being ordained as a priest in December 24th, 1978. In 2016, Francis called him to serve in the Roman Curia as a prefect of the new dicastery for the laity, the family, and life. Father Michael Collins has authored books about Francis, said that as Camerlengo, Cardinal Farrell had the role of verifying the Pope's death. Speaking to RTE Radio, he said, so what happens next is, it was an Irishman, Cardinal Kevin Farrell, who actually made the official announcement of the Pope's death to the world. He is what's called a Camerlengo, the key keeper, and he's got the position of verifying the Pope's death. So you may be wondering how the body will be dressed and where the coffin will be held. In the days following the death are packed with centuries-old traditions and rituals, including his funeral and his public exhibition of his body. His body is now set to be moved into St. Peter's Basilica at the Vatican later this week, where he will lie in state for 3 days before his funeral. No date has been announced when this will happen. However, when Pope Benedict died on December 31st, 2022, his remains were moved to St. Peter's 3 days later. Hundreds of thousands of mourners are expected to visit the Francis embalmed body to pay their respects to the beloved leader of the Catholic Church. The body will then be dressed in red robes with a white mitre on his head, and he will be taken to St. Peter's Basilica, where he will lie in state for 3 days. His funeral will take place within 6 days. A date for the ceremony is yet to be announced. Traditionally, papal funerals are an elaborate affair, but before his death, Pope Francis sought to simplify the ceremony. Unlike his predecessors, he said he did not want to be buried in the grottos beneath St. Peter's Basilica at the Vatican. So UK royal family members are expected to attend the Pope's funeral. Oh, I wonder if that includes Harry. If the Vatican is in agreement, that is, according to a royal source, Francis is likely to be buried in the Basilica of Santa Maria Maggiore in Rome's Esquilinio neighborhood rather than the grottos. But it is too early to say which members of the royal family will travel to Italy to pay their final respects. Meanwhile, the Union flag will be flown half-mast at royal residences where the king is not in residence. And somber music will be played at the changing of the guard ceremony to reflect the sadness of the occasion. Crowds are building in honor of Francis. Visitors have been pictured praying. Pilgrims are carrying wooden crosses to the residence of the Pope. And updates are coming in constantly. People are speculating who will be the next Pope. There are 5 contenders to succeed Francis in the Vatican. He was the first Latin American Pope, which signaled a wider change within the Catholic Church. And there is now speculation as to whether there will be a Black or Asian Pope. Will there be a woke Pope? A trans Pope? Here are the top contenders to become the next Supreme Pontiff. Peter Turkson, 76, is the former Bishop of Cape Coast. He would be the first Black Pope, will have the appeal of reaching out to Africa. Born in Ghana, he was sent by Pope Francis as a peace envoy to South Sudan. He occupies middle ground on the tricky subject of gay relationships, arguing that laws in many African countries are too harsh, but that the views of Africans on the subject must be respected. Turkson was the bookie's favourite at one point during the 2013 conclave when Francis was chosen. Then we've got Luis Antonio Tagle, 67, the former Archbishop of Manila. He's emerged as a frontrunner in the betting markets. He would have the appeal of being the first Asian pope, the region with the fastest growing Catholic population. He opposes abortion rights in the Philippines, but would be considered one of the more liberal candidates. He's complained that the Catholic Church has been too harsh towards gay and divorced couples, and that this has hampered its evangelical work. And then we've got Pietro Parolin, 70. He is the closest to a continuity candidate to Francis, having worked with Francis as Cardinal Secretary of State. He is seen as a moderate, though not as close to the liberal wing as Francis has sometimes appeared to be. When Ireland voted in 2015 to legalize same-sex marriages, he described it as a defeat for humanity. In recent times, his star's fallen a little, thanks to his being the architect of the 28th agreement between the Holy See and China, which some regard as a sellout to the Chinese Communist Party. The next potential successor is Peter Erdo, 72, the Archbishop of Esztergom, Budapest, will be the second pope after John Paul II to have ministered in the former Soviet bloc, when church leaders were often persecuted. He campaigned for his predecessor, Joseph Mindszenty, to be exonerated after being arrested for opposing Hungary's communist regime. Erdo is a deep conservative who has spoken against divorce or remarried Catholics receiving Holy Communion. And then we've got Jose Tolentino, 59, who carries the suffix de Mendonca to distinguish himself. Hailing from Cristiano Ronaldo's birthplace of Madeira, Portugal, he has served as an archbishop as well as held down a number of Vatican roles. As the relative youth candidate, he has advocated that biblical scholars engage with the modern world by watching films and listening to music. Keir Starmer has said Francis was Pope for the poor, downtrodden and forgotten. Keir Starmer, the insidious bureaucrat who is running the UK into the ground and is severing all kinds of help to the poorest in the UK, including winter fuel allowances for the elderly, cutting back on childcare allowances for poorer people. Absolute scummo. Now pretending he cares about the Pope caring for the poor, the downtrodden, and the forgotten. What an absolute hypocrite. Here's what he wrote on X. Deeply saddened to hear of the death of His Holiness Pope Francis. Just like he went up to Southport and pretended like he cared about the girls that had been stabbed in that horrific act. And it later came out that he was involved in some kind of legal shenanigans with the parents of the stabber. Going back to the Rwanda, colonialism, genocide. No, well, man, Ziad was Church of England, Henry VIII. So Keir Starmer, pretending to be deeply saddened, says his tireless efforts to promote a world that is fairer for all will leave a lasting legacy. On behalf of the people of the United Kingdom, I share my sincerest condolences to the whole Catholic Church. Yeah, sure you do. King Charles is greatly moved by Pope Francis's meeting earlier in the month. They were greatly moved to have visited Francis earlier this month as they joined those sending their condolences. And Charles has said, my wife and I were most deeply saddened to learn of the death of Pope Francis. Our heavy hearts have been somewhat eased, however, to know that His Holiness was able to share an Easter greeting with the Church and the world he served with such devotion throughout his life and ministry. His Holiness will be remembered for his compassion, his concern for the unity of the Church, and for his tireless commitment to the common causes of all people of faith, and to those of goodwill who work for the benefit of others. His belief that care for creation is an existential expression of faith in God resounded with so many across the world. Through his work and care for both people and planet, he profoundly touched the lives of so many. Queen and I remember with particular affection our meetings with His Holiness over the years, and we were greatly moved to have been able to visit him earlier in the month. We send our most heartfelt condolences and profound sympathy to the Church he served with such resolve, and to the countless people around the world who, inspired by his life, will be mourning the devastating loss of this faithful follower of Jesus Christ. Anyway, it's endless what's coming in. And like I said earlier, I'm going to try and get Kevin Annett in. Let me just check my email, see if he's responded. So let me have a look how you guys are doing in the chat before I continue. We've got almost 1,000 watching across all the platforms right now. Yes, thank you, Dennis. Let's get the likes up. Let's get this shared. So if you were a fan of the Pope, put a 1 in the chat. If you are not a fan of the Pope and the Catholic Church, put a 2 in the chat. Because the Catholic Church, you know, from reading all of the different religious texts and following, have you seen the video alleging that Keir Starmer kissing? No, Jen, I've not seen that yet. Got lots of 2s coming in. Okay. Because we're going to play some of my back catalogue of Kevin Annett. And this was recorded before the Pope died, and I don't want anyone to take offense. Because Kevin Annett is one of the most hard-hitting researchers of the Catholic Church, the dark side of it. So it looks like you guys are pretty much up for that. But before we do that, I'm going to try and bring Kevin Annett in at some point today. Do you guys in the chat remember when we had Kevin Annett on about 5 years ago, talking about Kamloops, the disappearance of the children, the Queen and Prince Philip's visit to Canada? Put an 8 in the chat if you remember Kevin Annett coming on. Put a 9 in the chat if you don't remember. But I learned the hard way about the Catholic Church because I had a friend in prison, wrote about him in prison time. He's also in my book, Clinton, Bush, and CIA Conspiracies. I called him Weird Al, and he was very well educated. He was a pilot for the original Mexican cartel, an American guy, and looks like a few 8s coming in. So I learned a lot from him about the CIA and the DEA and the corruption. Really woke me up to it. Anyway, my friend Al, he was suing the Catholic Church. The reason that Al was the black sheep of his family was he encountered a PDF Catholic priest when he was a kid. And he showed me all of the legal paperwork that he had. And this was in the Tucson, Arizona diocese. And in the Tucson, Arizona diocese, they had to, in the legal disclosure, they had to show the properties that they owned. And it was like nearly every street in Tucson had a house owned by the Catholic Church. And I was like, Al, how is that possible? How can the Catholic Church own a house on nearly every street? Let's take the Pope off the while I'm talking about these things for now. I said, why have they got a house on every street, Al? And he said that the Catholic Church were conning old people into leaving their houses to them in the belief they would buy a place in heaven. But it was even worse than that. The Catholic Church weren't waiting for these people to die and then snatching the houses. they had Catholic care homes. So they were getting these old people to sign the houses over to them, pipelining these old people to the Catholic care homes, billing them huge amounts of money to house them in the Catholic care homes, and taking possession of the houses. So they had to disclose this to Al because he was going to get a huge amount of money from them as a settlement from what the PDF priest did to him when he was a kid. And he was from a wealthy family. All of his siblings had done well in life. And because he encountered this Catholic priest who did the PDF things, suffered the trauma, got into drugs and life of criminality. Now, sadly, when Al was a pilot doing these runs, he had a plane crash over Indonesia, and he had a blood transfusion that was tainted with hepatitis C. And this was way back when. And when I met him in prison, the treatment of hepatitis C was 30,000 a year interferon. They wouldn't pay that. They'd rather you just die as fast as possible so they can get a healthy prison on your bunk. And so they can maximize the profits. And when Al got out, he died. He died. And I recorded several conversations with him when he got out of prison. I think this was about 10, 15 years ago now, Rosa. But I did put a lot of my conversations with him in my book, Clinton, Bush, and CIA Conspiracies, because he'd asked me not to publish that until after his death, because he was afraid. He was afraid for his own life if we put that stuff out there. Yeah, and then we also had Joey Torres on, who was a co-founder of the 18th Street Gang out of Los Angeles that spread all over the world, like MS. And he was also came into it at the hands of a PDF priest in his neighborhood in Los Angeles. And that PDF priest, the kids didn't understand it. That PDF priest was handing out Nike trainers, Nike shoes to the kids in exchange for the PDF priest, how do I phrase it, performing oral on these little kids. And he was one of them. And Joey Torres, we did a series of podcasts with him. Amazing stories. He served decades in California prison. But that set him on the path of criminality. And he ended up murdering his boxing representative, and a very chaotic life after that happened to him. And he's only just getting a settlement now, but he's also got hepatitis and he's got cancer and he's suffering tremendously as well. So, you know, from our research, the Catholic Church has housed one of the biggest PDF rings in the world. And many, put a 1 in the chat if you still think the Catholic Church houses one of the biggest PDF rings in the world. Put a 2 in the chat if you think the Catholic Church has cleaned house and got rid of all of the PDFs. Be very interested to know your thoughts. Another one of the things that woke me up was the Sins of the Father program documentary. Sins of Our Father, I think it was called. Sins of Our Father documentary. Sins of the Father documentary. Yeah, we'll get to that in a second. All right, so looks like it's nearly all ones. Yes, folks, sadly, I feel the same. And one of the things that makes me feel the same was the Sins of My Father. Let me pull up Catholic. This priest basically, whenever he got busted, and I think he had hundreds of victims, ranging from babies to like kids of all ages and sizes. I'm trying to get the name of the priest now. Let me see. Catholic priest. Sins of the Father. Ryan Erickson. Catholic priest. John Smith. Sins of the Father. Is that it? John Smith forced the Archbishop of Canterbury's resignation. The story of John Smith is absolutely horrific because when they told the family members, I mean, these family members trusted the church to leave their kids with this with this PDF. So we had full access to do these things, the babies and everything. And when they complained, they were told that, you know, there would be consequences, this priest would be dealt with. And what happened was they just moved him 20 miles away. Disgusting. And he just did more of the same, which enabled him to have, they estimate, potentially hundreds of survivors. But before we go to some Kevin Annett back catalogue, let me just read a bit of this, because it was watching that documentary. The Catholic Church has brought in these high-priced lawyers to protect him. He should have got life in prison. So, the prolific, brutal, and horrific SA perpetrated by John Smith was covered up by the powerful clergy. So, is this one? John Smith. Church, no, that's the Church of England, isn't it? Where's the Sins of Our Father one? Where is it? Have they hidden it off the internet or something? Let me find it again. Catholic priest, Sins of Our Father documentary. It's not coming up in the top of the search results anymore. This is really weird. They really have hidden this. It used to come up at the top. Right. Can any of you guys in the chat remember the name of the Catholic priest? Because he even got out after his prison sentence, and I think he went over to Holland and started doing the same. Right, if you're watching and you've watched the Sins of Our Father, because this is the power of the Catholic Church. It used to be all over the top of the search results, and now you can't even find it. Where's it gone? I used to quote this to people all the time. Let's have a look. Has anyone in the chat got his name? The Sins of Our Father documentary. Can anyone put it in so I can just Google his name? He's got a wiki page and everything. Right, I'm on page 2. Netflix, new calls to the Baltimore HD documents a controversial priest. Is this it? Netflix crime series. Sins of the Father, abuse and betrayal in Baltimore. Yeah, that's where it started, wasn't it? It was Baltimore. Ratzinger. Is that him? Ratzinger? Betrayal in 150, at least 150 priests in Baltimore. Essayed about a controversial priest. Right, let me see if I can find it here. Netflix crime series Spurs calls for church to reveal priest past. About a controversial priest. The Keepers. That's the Keepers. They have literally buried this thing. Ratzinger. Someone said, let me try that. Priest. Documentary. Ratzinger. Documentary. A documentary titled Benedict Trials of the Pope explored the life and reign of Pope Benedict Joseph. Oh, that's the Pope's thing, isn't it? All right, while I show you then some of the Kevin Annett back catalogue, I will continue to research that and come up with what I find. Let me find our Kevin Annett back catalogue, and because he breaks this stuff down hardcore. I've got it on my Odyssey channel for obvious reasons. Let me bring this in. Ratzinger is still a fugitive. Really? Baltimore, yeah. And they're just moving him around 20, 30 miles. Disgusting. All right. Let me get this video in from bringing in Kevin Annett, folks. If you've never seen Kevin Annett before, you're in for a treat. This is what stuff I've pre-recorded with him. I'm going to try and get him in tonight properly to talk about the death. He will break it down with his phenomenal academic mind. And he himself was a priest. So here's everything we've done with Kevin Annett. I know my guy Shu right now, he's getting all of the clips. Like we did a clip. Kevin Annett did a segment on Opus Dei, like the priest's assassins, the Pope's assassins. So here's the first one we did with Kevin. It's got stuff about the royal family in it as well. And let's go through this then, shall we, folks? And you guys let me know what you think. And like I said, if you've never seen Kevin, he's a brilliant speaker. Let me just make sure I've got it turned all the way up. Yep, audio is all the way up. Let me make it big. There we go. So many people have been emailing me daily saying, why have you not got Kevin Annett on the channel? I've been on the road filming podcasts. I do apologize. I'm back in headquarters now. And this has been the absolute priority to get Kevin on. Oddly enough, when I was interviewing David I yesterday on the Isle of Wight, he did raise this subject. And I've got a clip coming out with him on this subject as well. And he also raised Kevin and praised Kevin to the high heavens for his work, exposing not just the atrocity that we're going to discuss today, but if you go back and look at Kevin's playlist, I'll put it in the description box below the video, I'll go over to his links as well, you'll see he's been exposing atrocities committed by church and state across the world. Got all kinds of esoteric little videos, such as the papal assassination squads and all kinds of esoteric sounding organizations. It's endlessly fascinating. It's like a labyrinth of information that you would really have to find someone who's done deep research to get this information out there. And Kevin certainly has done that. He's been banned from various platforms, but we've got him on here today. And this is not a conspiracy. You know, whenever we have controversial guests on, people say, this person's making this up. Why have you got him on? 215 bodies were found. This is not a conspiracy. All the main news entities in the UK are reporting this story. Kevin has been talking about this for years. The mainstream media is only just playing catch up. Anyway, without any further ado, here is Kevin. He's one of the most articulate speakers we've ever had on the channel, and you're going to see how well researched he is on this stuff. 215 bodies were found. The president, the PM of Canada, is asking the Pope to apologize, and no apology has been forthcoming. So we're going to go over all that. All right, Kevin, do you want to just say a little bit about yourself to reintroduce yourself to people who are not familiar with your work?
Well, I've been at this 25 years. I was a Protestant clergyman on the west coast of Canada when I discovered mass graves in Port Alberni from eyewitnesses who dug them. That was the fall of 1994, and I lost my job over that. I lost my family, blacklisted, but a whole new life opened up. I discovered my purpose, which was to bring out this truth and also expose this false religion, especially in Rome, which has been the cause historically of so much of this genocide. And for Prime Minister Trudeau to ask for an apology from the Pope, an apology is a legal formula whereby people indemnify themselves. It has nothing to do with sorrow or changing the problem. As a matter of fact, this present Pope constantly reaffirms the standing Vatican policy that when children are harmed, the police are not to be told. It's an institutionalized cover-up. So we got to put that in context. Also, this location where they found the 215 children, as we all know from our own statistics, it's a drop in the bucket. There was tens of thousands of children who never came back, over half the children. And the government of Canada's official position is still the death rate was under 1%, even though their own documents show 50%. I mean, we surfaced these documents from Dr. Peter Bryce. It's in murderbydecree.com. All of the evidence that the children were deliberately being exposed to TB and smallpox, killed with germ warfare. The record's continually suppressed. It's been published ever since when you look at when the stuff first came out in Canada, the Ottawa Citizen had it on the front page of November 15th, 1907. So that's 114 years ago. The extent of this has happened, was well known. So all of this is a continual, like an Orwellian rewriting of history every 5 minutes. And they're relying on people's ignorance and denial and horror at these things. But what's significant, and I just want to remind folks that this last week, we reissued the list that we had sent out originally in 2008, 28 mass grave sites across Canada. And as well in our list is 6 other sites that are present body dumping grounds for Native people that are killed. Because don't forget, the media and the government and the churches who did the crime are now framing it as a horrible thing that happened in the past. Well, the reality is, that it's ongoing. This genocide is continual, and these mass graves include many Native families being killed and driven off their land by Chinese corporations, PetroChina, in collusion with the Canadian government. Prime Minister Trudeau has allowed them to station their troops on Canadian soil. So I mean, this is all part of this bigger agenda of the Chinese government doesn't want, the extent of this genocide shown, because it'll shine a light on how it's still happening today. So, the whole cover-up happening now is going to be seen in that context.
Who initiated the search for these corpses?
It was what's called the Tk'emlúps Band Council. Now, in the Native world, there's the traditional people, and then there's the band councils who are appointed basically by the federal government. They're agents of the crown. They're not allowed to talk about this stuff. As a matter of fact, there was a secret deal struck. One of my friends, Bruce Gunn, was in on the meeting, so he told me about it. Back in 1996, the United Church, who was the first church being sued over the residential school massacre, they sat down with the West Coast Council of Native Chiefs and said, we will give you settlement money, personal injury settlement money, provided you do 2 things. Have nothing to do with Kevin Annett and his investigation, and never mention dead children and mass graves at these schools. The chiefs went for it, and ever since that period until right today, they've not mentioned. As a matter of fact, they've been our chief adversary in stopping the unearthing of these graves, like the dig we conducted at the Anglican school in Brantford, the Mohawk school, where we actually uncovered bones, which were verified to be children. The Canadian media totally blacked that out in 2011. Today, suddenly it's a legitimate topic, and the reason it is the Tk'emlúps Band Council, for generations, were the ones that tracked down the children when they ran away. They would help bury the children. There was a special deal with the chiefs going back almost a century. If you bring in all the children into these death camps, your own children don't have to be brought in. So they were on they were on the payroll and colluding up to their eyebrows for a long time. So naturally, they want to conceal that by looking like the good guys now. But one of the reasons we think that the Tk'emlúps Band Council initiated it was that don't forget, the Kamloops School is where Queen Elizabeth abducted those 10 children in October 1964. And they were never seen again, just 30 kilometers away from the school at a place called Dead Man's Creek. Well, William Coombs, the eyewitness, saw she and Prince Philip do that. The whole testimony of William was on the verge of being released again. We had relaunched the tribunal in Canada, the Canadian Genocide Tribunal. And right on the verge of that happening, suddenly there's all this government media spin and church spin about the Kamloops School and how they're trying, they've created the impression that they're trying to get at the heart of what really happened. Well, that was to undo very much what we're doing again, because we were beginning to get real traction around the world in the media. Now, the very fact that the BBC and New York Times and groups that normally ignore what we're doing, the very fact that they're repeating now the government's line on this and reporting this, even the Pope's responding, obviously that's a huge contrivance, another really, Sean, it's the last stage of the cover-up. They got rid of the documents. They silenced the witnesses. Now that what they've got to get rid of is any lingering forensic evidence. Because don't forget, the RCMP and the churches have been destroying these graves systematically for many years. And they've got to make it seem like, that they're not shirking their responsibility, before international law to investigate genocide. Because 2 years ago, Prime Minister Trudeau admitted publicly genocide had occurred. This is his way of saying, look, we're fulfilling all our obligations under the law, we're digging, when in fact they're not really. It's like their previous bogus inquiries. It'll conceal more than it reveals, really. We've learned that already.
So the mainstream media in the UK is reporting that there could be various reasons for the deaths of these kids, including disease, TB, malnourishment. They do have abuse on that list. What do you make of them peppering those various reasons out there?
It's the usual psychological technique of, well, yeah, some bad things happened, but we didn't really set out to wipe them all out. So they've got to, like you say, pepper it with all sorts of other, it's what lawyers call creating a paper trail. You fog the genuine evidence with all this other stuff. One thing they tried early on in this whole cover-up was they would really emphasize how children were denied contact with their parents and beaten sometimes. Well, people say, well, that happened to me as a kid. What's the big deal? What are the neighbors complaining about, right? The reality that they're completely smothering again is that the Kamloops School was a special treatment center. And we have this from correspondence from eyewitnesses. Children who ran away a lot and who resisted and who held on to their identity and their language were shipped off to Kamloops. And what happened there was it was an early recipient of military money for mind control experiments, sterilization programs. William Coombs, Jesse Jules, other witnesses have described, and it's in murderbydecree.com, they've described being taken when they tried running away and put among children who were dying of tuberculosis. They described subterranean chambers where children were taken and experimented on. And they pointed out that site, and they said, if you look on the grounds of the school now, the recent building that the band council constructed is right over that subterranean chamber. So as the puppet chiefs often do, they actually build stuff over the genuine graves, and then they dig up stuff where children might have died from other causes and say, yeah, let's see how they died. But 90% of it, it's like an iceberg. You don't see it, what would really happen, because don't forget, the proof of that has been systematically destroyed. That in the government even admitted during their bogus Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where people weren't even allowed to name the names of perpetrators, they admitted during that yes, half the children probably died. And there were government document destruction teams going around as early as 1960 and systematically wiping out any evidence of children dying. So, it's a miracle if you find out any of the truth of what happened. Fortunately, we published this in murderbydecree.com. You can see indications of these much wider genocidal crimes, which once again is being edited out of the official media accounts, right?
When you said mind control experiments, could you define what you mean by that? Perhaps expand on the nature of the experiments that you feel were underway there?
There was pain threshold experiments. And for example, in at least half a dozen other hospitals, Indian hospitals across Canada in the West, they would do things like see the limits of mental and physical endurance to pain. So they would take children, put chemical warfare agents on their skin, rip out parts of their body to see, it was military backed, to see how much pain a human body can take and have the brain still function to apply to soldiers in combat. They're using children to do that. We've had survivors of the Lincoln Park Air Force Base in Calgary describe to me, the sole survivor of those experiments, describing to me, Gail Perkins, her name is, she lives in Salt Spring Island, British Columbia. And she said the doctor working on her had an SS tattoo right there. His cover name in the Royal Canadian Air Force was Major Bob Armstrong. We've discovered his name is Heinz Lehmann. He was an SS doctor who worked in Auschwitz. Most of the paperclip Nazi doctors were brought into Canada first after World War II, and then brought into the US through false identities and passports. Canada's always served as kind of the back door for all of this stuff. But a big chunk of those Nazi scientists, they didn't simply go to work with NASA and the space program. They were at work in Indian hospitals right across Canada. Joseph Mengele, documented to have worked out of the Allen Memorial Institute of Montreal. The list goes on, and that's why, you know, the list we published of the residential school mass graves, we included some of these body dumping grounds, because it's in a place like Kamloops. You know, they were constantly doing these experiments. Kids were saying, as a matter of fact, we have a letter from Kamloops principal, and I'll dig up the name in a minute. He said, there's so many children down, we've had to bury them 2 and 3 to a grave. Right. And, you know, I mean, this is official correspondence going on. And yet now it's like, oh, we've suddenly discovered. It's kind of like Al Capone in Chicago saying, gee, I didn't know people were being thrown in the lake. You know, let's do an official inquiry into my own crimes. The fact that the Catholic Church is allowed to do this, is allowed to still operate, along with the Anglican United Churches. They wipe out tens of thousands of children. They get away with it. And then they have the gall to define the narrative and say, you know, we're going to do right by now by our, you know, these poor children that somehow got harmed by somebody else. I mean, it's like a crime without criminals. And that's the consistent, you know, spin that they put on this, right?
So I imagine experiments of that nature are expensive, and they have to somehow justify it to the, you know, whoever's in charge of the budget at the time. Is it on the basis of, you know, it's going to be a military advantage, we have to do this, it's in the interest of national security? Is that the kind of philosophy that they use to justify these horrendous acts?
Well, don't forget, they don't have to justify them. Who are they answerable to, right? But when the stuff comes out and they have to create a public spin on it, they say, yeah, it happened during the Cold War. There was tremendous amounts of U.S. military money for these, you know, mind control experiments, but other things too, like big pharma. And here's the link to today and the whole COVID thing.
Oh yeah, we can't discuss that, Kevin, unfortunately.
Oh well, okay.
We just got to stick on the present story, the kids.
Okay, well let me.
Yeah.
Okay, then let me say that related. This has been documented that various pharmaceutical companies were continually using Native children in drug testing protocols for all sorts of experiments and testing out new serums. That was standard practice. Some of them, you know, we found that some of these companies were donating to the seminaries where priests and clergymen are trained. And there was a long-standing agreement. They fund the churches provide batches of children for these drug testings. That was going on in a big way. There was a separate, at Kamloops, there was a separate infirmary where the children were taken. Doug Abbott, he was a survivor of the school. He said, I was called one of the red tag boys. If you had high marks or you spoke your language, you got a red tag, and they put you under the x-ray machine for 10 minutes and they sterilized you. That was happening in Kamloops. Just like out of Auschwitz, the sterilization programs. They would try out experimental IUDs in young girls, insert them, like at the Lakehead Thunder Bay Hospital, where a lot of Nazi doctors worked out of. Same thing in the Kamloops Infirmary. So these are obviously things that they're not going to report, because the things they report can be classified legally as a tort offense, as a civil action where you apologize and give money, not criminal law. Criminal law is when there's mass murder and genocide and people have to go to jail, starting with the Pope and the Prime Minister, and because they're the responsible officers. So don't forget, these bodies have already been convicted in our common law court trial in Europe in 2012, 2013. So you know, what they're doing is utterly illegal. For a convicted criminal body to be digging up their own crime scene, it's forbidden specifically for the perpetrator of a crime to investigate it or to frame a narrative about it. But that's exactly what's going on again. So Canada gets away with it again, right?
So one of the things I found disturbing was they said when the kids came in, they weren't allowed to speak their own language or engage in the cultural practices. And the justification was that it was to help them assimilate into Canadian society. So what would it be like for a kid arriving at somewhere like Kamloops?
We've had direct descriptions of that from people like Harriet Nahenny, Doug Wilson, others who in our films and on murderbydecree.com describe the first day. Whole villages cleaned out. Under the law, a child 7 years and older had to go to one of these or their parents would go to jail. In fact, they cleaned out whole villages. So, I mean, imagine a village devoid of children, just gone. Even the babies carted off to these places. That often just kill the babies. lethal injection, incineration, that kind of thing. I've had Irene Fable. We have her online, a 78-year-old woman describing seeing newborns thrown into the furnace by Catholic priests, the Muskegon school in Saskatchewan. So, I mean, yeah, those who survived would be brought in, they'd be lined up, their heads immediately shaved, given a number. And the people who did that to them were other Native kids, like in Auschwitz, the Sonderkommando, right? They would be beaten. The kids who agreed to rat out their fellow students that have clubs and that start whacking the other Native kids if they spoke their own language, because language is identity and it's your power. It also identifies in an oral culture, like on the west coast of Canada or anywhere in the Native world. An oral culture defines the territories. When one dialect changes, that means the territory ends. So if you want to take somebody's land and confuse the memory of who owns what, you've got to wipe out the language. It was all about money and land, don't forget. These churches, the Catholic Church is one of the biggest landowners in the world because of these practices that go back many centuries, right? So it all had a reason to it. It was all about money, just like it is now. So the thing about banning language, it was key to the mental control and the long-term genocide that was being the plan from the beginning and carries on today.
Did MK Ultra have a branch in Canada?
Oh yeah, very much. Canada was one of the chief recipients of MK Ultra money. Like you can look up, this is one of the stories they've allowed out, Dr. Ewan Cameron at the Allen Memorial Institute. One of my friends, Ann Diamond, is a survivor of his experiments. And he had a method where he could wipe out memory and then reconstruct it. It was like to create a new personality, the perfect worker ant or soldier who wouldn't question. In fact, they developed a drug as part of the MK Ultra experiments, which were going on in Kamloops. They developed a drug called chlorpromazine, which is known as the chemical lobotomizer, because Ruth Kyander, who was another one of these Nazi scientists, described it as allows the suspension of critical judgment without loss of consciousness. So you've got the perfect slave. People can function, but they can't think critically. They can't question. And it also had a side effect of sterilizing people. So it's the perfect answer of the elite: control world population or depopulate, and then have a population that can't question. When you look at people walking around today or at any point, and the extent to which they just automatically obey authority, I mean, I think, there's more than meets the eye on this in terms of developing these drugs and methods that are really about mass mind control and conformity. So the natives are the perfect guinea pig for that. They're always tried out first. We're seeing now some of the evidence of that, but it's this wider story has got to be told, because then people will realize, you got to turn the tables on these churches and governments, put them on trial, stop them from doing these investigations that are really just destroying a crime scene. It's really an obstruction of justice what they're doing right now. And one of the announcements that came out is we're forming our own forensic teams with the help of people in Europe and America. And we're going to be going to some of these other remaining sites, doing our own analysis, releasing the full results of what those forensic tests show, cause of death, who did it, that whole thing, right?
So we see a bit of passing the buck here, with the church blaming the government and the government blaming the church. Who created the idea of these schools? Who funded the schools, and who ran the schools?
The original idea is very old. It comes out of Rome, right? And it was the Jesuit model, and the present Pope is a Jesuit, of course, the only one in history. The Jesuit plan was you go into an area, you take the children of leaders, you brainwash them, and then through them, you run the country. And that was the model of the first residential school in Canada, created by a Jesuit bishop called Paul Duryea. And that model, it was called a watchman system, where the Catholic Indians on the reserve would watch everybody else. And if anyone was speaking their language or practicing their traditional beliefs, wham, they'd be killed. Many of the chiefs today on Indian reservations are descended from those Catholic chiefs who literally took the indigenous chiefs out in the woods and killed them or drove them into exile. And they're the band councils, like the one in Kamloops now, are the descendants of those agents of the Vatican. So it originally came from Rome, but in Canada, it was a tag team operation from the beginning. They were running mission schools, but in around 1890, 91, the Crown stepped in, legalized it, gave the legal sanction to these schools so that the schools were run by the churches and funded about 50-50 by both church and state. That's thoroughly documented in murderbydecree.com. As a matter of fact, early on in my research, like 20 years ago now, I found a document which sealed the fate of the churches in the first lawsuits. It was called the Application for Admission Form. Every native parent had to sign it or they'd go to jail. It surrendered guardianship rights to the principal of the school, who was invariably a clergyman, and it was countersigned by the Indian agent. So it was church and state wiping out any control that parents had over their children. And so that's why church and state were both sued in the lawsuits. And they've always been, I mean, they're really one organism in Canada. There's no pretense of a separation of church and state in Canada at all. In fact, even I'm not sure in the law in England, but there's my ancestor, Peter Annett, he was a free thinker philosopher in London, and they put him in the stocks because he criticized the doctrine of Orthodox Christianity about the Bible or about the Trinity and the miracle stories. And he was charged under a law that's still in place. It's called blasphemous libel. If you criticize, in Canada, if you criticize the doctrines of the Christian church, you can go to jail for 2 years because it's seen as an act of treason. If you attack the church, you're attacking the state. And that's, that King George during the American Revolution said, "No bishop, no king." That was his slogan. If you get rid of the bishops like the American revolutionists were doing, or like Cromwell had done earlier in England, you get rid of the king because it's coming from the same notion of one person rule, either, a religious monarch or a secular one. It's the same idea. So really, there's no division in practice between church and state when it comes to these crimes of genocide, whether in Canada or anywhere, really,
Okay, well, taking Kamloops as an example, then I'm just trying to figure out the hierarchy of who would be involved in that location. So you said the kids go in, the lackeys shave their hair, and do this and that, and then would they be answering to priests, nuns?
Yes,
Government
staff are all
employees?
church. Yeah, the staff are all church people, priests and nuns. In the Anglican and United Churches, they'd be church hired staff. The principal had absolute hiring, firing ability, but he was answerable in theory to the Minister of Indian Affairs and to the local Indian agents, right? But survivors as children rarely saw Indian agents. They were supposed to have monthly inspections. People have told me they didn't see Indian agents for years. The church was given carte blanche to do anything. And I know when I was thrown out of the United Church for surfacing this stuff, I wrote to the Attorney General of British Columbia, and I said, "Hey, they're putting me through this kangaroo court. I'm not allowed to see evidence. This is going against due process." And he wrote back, Ojel Desange, the Attorney General, in 1998. He writes back and says, "The processes, internal disciplinary processes of the church are outside the jurisdiction of my department." In other words, they're outside the law of Canada. So like with the Catholic Church, but with all these churches, they're not answerable to the law. They have their own law. They can do what they want to their employees, like me. They can do whatever they want to children in their custody. They were the legal guardians. They could kill them. Like today, you can kill a native and there's no legal consequence because they're not citizens. They're wards of the state. They're like children under the law. You can do whatever you want to them. So I mean, it's not surprising that with that whole system in place, you're going to get not only the mass murder, but the present cover-up. Nobody's ever gone to jail for the murder of one of these 60,000 children, yet they're claiming to be doing another investigation into it. I mean, it's tragedy become farce. I don't even know, after a while, like I was just talking to a friend of mine yesterday, and he survived these experiments. He was a Haida man who was put in the United Church Charles Camsell Hospital in Edmonton, and they were sterilizing them and doing all sorts of stuff. But he said, all I can do, the only way I survive this now is seeing this crap they're pulling now, just got to laugh at it. You got to realize that there's a higher justice and we can't give up this fight, but we got to know that these people will answer to this higher justice. And, I believe that, but it doesn't lessen our need to continue pushing on this and exposing that these things are being covered up now to allow it to continue. There's Native families being wiped out as we speak in northern British Columbia by the Chinese cartels, by forcing them off their land to get the liquid natural gas. They can cover up the crimes of the past. They can do it all easier now.
So were schools like Kamloops magnets for pedophiles?
Well, yeah, because first of all, the Catholic Church since 1929 has had the policy in Crimen Solicitatis that says if you rape a child, you're to be quiet about it. The police will not be told. So if you're a child rapist, you can get ordained as a priest and rape whoever you want, and you'll be officially protected by a papal doctrine that goes back to 1929. Every pope stands by it. Perfect breeding ground for child rapists. But beyond that, there's a law in Canada that protects, like I just mentioned, you cannot, Section 176 of the Criminal Code of Canada says you cannot disturb a clergyman in the course of his duties. It's a criminal offense. So, they're carting kids off to be raped. The cop stops and, no, I'm taking these children to mass. Oh, okay, father, do whatever you like, and then they're dead. I mean, these built-in institutional safeguards are designed to allow genocide and protect it and conceal it after, right? It's set up that way, right?
So people are shocked by the discovery of the 215 bodies, but the impression I'm getting from you is that this was not unique. What was the scale of this then? How many other Kamloops were there out there?
At the peak, right after World War II, there was 141 of these places, most of them in the West, because the West was where the lingering indigenous people were. The term assimilation, it actually means to eat somebody, and that's the code word that they used for genocide. Now it's healing and reconciliation. You hear that word a lot. As if you can somehow reconcile with a little corpse in the ground. But the language is very important. It's designed to normalize and to soften the impact of what we're talking about. I mean, if people really knew what put those children in the ground, they wouldn't be able to sleep at night. And they certainly wouldn't be, if they were moral individuals, they wouldn't be able to put money in the collection plate. One of the things that has to happen immediately is the charitable tax exempt status of these churches has to be immediately revoked, because if not, Canadian taxpayers are breaking international law by funding a proven criminal organization like the Vatican that launders money for the mob, that deals in arms, that deals in children, that's committed genocide for centuries. So we have to stop paying these taxes to these genocidal bodies, tithings. It's just international law and morality, right?
So you said there's a vast number of these schools then, and I think you said you estimated that 60,000 kids in total were disappeared. What do you base the 60,000 number on?
The government's official statistics are 150,000 children died. We've found as early as the first year, and here's one table, you can't see it very well, but it's from the first, you see these words, died. This is the Catholic school in Regina, Saskatchewan. The year of its first opening, 1896, 8 of the 12 children were dead, 2/3. Okay, that's before the TB even starts building, right? 2/3 dead. Now that's a genocidal death rate level. Peter Bryce, who actually the mainstream press have quoted, he in 1907, he was an Ontario health officer. He visited all the schools in the West. He said in every one, they were taking children who were healthy, locking them in with the ones who were sick, and then never treating them. He said, he wrote a book about it called A National Crime, which we've reprinted in murderbyDecree.com. He said 50 to 70% of the children dying was not uncommon. And like I said, the front page of the Ottawa Citizen gives a death rate of 69% at the Muskegon School in Saskatchewan. So, if you take that official figure, over half, it's half of 150,000 is 75,000 children. So even though by their own statistics, he's even greater than 60,000. But we know, I mentioned earlier how they would grab kids from a whole village. They didn't differentiate by age. So their estimate of 150,000 children is very low. It was probably double that. It's in the hundreds of thousands. Well, on average, half the children died. 50, 60,000 is conservative. It's 100,000 plus. And to show you how that isn't unrealistic, 50,000 dead children a year means you just had to have had one child die every week in the school. Now we know in 1 week period, there was, for example, we've got statistics of in the Kamloops infirmary, 6 children dead in a week. They don't give cause of death, of course. They all go into the infirmary and die. The death rate on the Indian reservations was around 5% when these places opened. In the schools, it was 50%. So 10 times the chance of dying if you go into an Indian school. And that was the same whether it's 1900, 1950. Neil Parker, the superintendent of Indian Affairs in 1949, said half the children are not surviving to take advantage of the education we give them. You know, that's the top official in Canada for Indian Affairs saying half are dying. And now the government tries to pawn off this, you know, 1-2%, 3,000 children over the entire century. I mean, it's Holocaust denial on an enormous scale, but everybody repeats it because they're the government, you know.
What were the kids' lives like before they were rounded up to be brought to these schools, and what methods did they use to round them up?
Oh, well, you mean what was it like on the reservation?
Yeah.
Pretty deplorable conditions, but still they had some freedom to hunt, to have, you know, certain limited, but you know, rights. But once you're in the schools, it's a prison. You can never leave, except in a casket. They had the Anglican Church. We found documents showing how they hired professional bounty hunters to go out and hunt down children. There was the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and clergy who would go out to the villages and clean them out. Harriet Nahanni describes how in her village of Klaus, it's on the west coast of Vancouver Island, the population went from 2,400 to 44 in 2 generations. That's about a 95% death rate from the smallpox and TB, right? Deliberately introduced. But when they rounded up the kids, it would be the cops, always the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and the clergy who would do it. And it was the chiefs who would track them down. Their own chiefs would then go hunt the kids, as the Mounties were. Harriet said she ran away. The Mounties would bring her back tied in a rope, running behind a car, you know, and then they put them in the stocks. They had the Anglican Church in Lytton, St. George's School, had these stocks where they would put children in, like out of the Middle Ages, right? Leave them in there for days. I talked to the guy who buried one of these kids. I mean, Sean, the evidence is enormous, and yet it's gleaned out all the time, just sifted out. And you know, the censorship with the internet now is so achievable that, you know, you talk to people now and mention my name and the work we did, and nobody knows. Nobody remembers, even though it was just 10 years ago. After the spin and the apology in 2008, my name was removed from the Canadian media. You never saw it again. Kevin Annett, it was like being a banned person in apartheid South Africa. Your name wasn't allowed to be mentioned. My name hasn't been mentioned. I'm always referred to as a controversial minister on the West Coast. And that word controversial gets Canadians scared, right? But yeah, names being banned, evidence being censored all the time. It's the norm. You know, so it's so essential now for the truth of this to come out, because they're doing it again. They're like I say, they're bearing the final piece of evidence, the forensic hard evidence that the bones are in the ground.
So I'm curious about the sleeping conditions then in the schools. Were they like sardined into dormitories, or what how was it structured?
Well, they always had the boys and the girls separate. They never let the boys and girls mix. Like Harriet said, she never saw her little brother. She was there for 3 years until he died. Never saw him once. So that, if you look at the Genocide Convention, that's one of the points in the definition of genocide. If you destroy normal family relations, right, and take children from one area, put them in another, and they would not only do that, separate the boys and girls, they each gave them a different name. So if you look in the records, 5 siblings in one family will each have a different last name. So A, you can't trace the dead, and B, the children don't even know who they are anymore. And they would give them derogatory names, like last names like Jumbo, Fatty, Fatty, you know, like designed to degrade. And, you know, when you work in the healing circles with survivors, like I've done for over 20 years, and even before that as a minister, you know, the death rate from suicide is enormous because people have zero self-esteem, and they're actually programmed when people start talking about these things to actually kill themselves. And I've seen that happen a lot, right? So talk about a David and Goliath battle. This is kind of, I mean, if there was such a thing as an honest movie making industry, it would make an amazing feature film, this whole story of how this came out, right? And what still goes on.
Yeah, I mean, you've described death and destruction on an industrial scale at the hands of priests and nuns. Is this a crowd psychology thing? Do they you know, how do they justify this? The priests and the nuns do it at this level.
They never tried to. I mean, I've spoken to people who used to work in these places, and it's the way that people rationalize. You know, they compartmentalize. They say, well, all I did was pick up the kids and drop them off. I mean, I don't know what went on in there. And, you know, don't forget, in Nuremberg, they did away with one of the Nuremberg principles in 1950, adopted in international law, was that you cannot use the excuse of following an order anymore to justify a crime against humanity. Well, this is what they still do all the time. The United Church ministers who got rid of me would laugh about it. During my defrocking, they thought I was finished. You know, they had taken away my family, my livelihood. They figured I was just going to crumple. And so they would joke with me. They felt they had nothing to lose. They said, of course we did these things, but who's ever going to care? This is Canada. Those are Indians. I mean, they would openly talk like that. So it kind of caused me to, you know, reevaluate my sense of human morality, how flexible people are when it comes to ethics and human life. And it's kind of like that we have infinite, it's like that picture of Adolf Hitler hugging little children, okay? Within our own circle of morality and life, we can love children all we like, but the others out there, it's almost, and I think Freud commented on this, Sigmund Freud in Civilization is Discontents. He said, we have infinite capacity to love those within our circle, as long as there's others on whom we can project our shadow, right? And that's very true in that we need those others to, and I serve that all the time. I've known that as a scapegoat when people go crazy and calling me names and everything. They're just venting their shadow because they can't look at their own guilt. They need to simply say it's a crazy minister who's making this stuff up. That way they don't have to look in the mirror and say, how could we, and this is the basic question, how could we as a culture have done this and allow it to carry on and now continue the crime by covering it up and allowing it to happen tomorrow? I mean, if we don't look at that, it's not about Native people. They're just the latest victims. It's about us and what happened to us back in Europe. And you know, our whole legacy of genocide, which spans millennia. And we've got to recover our humanity. And that's the only solution here, because we're just seeing the inhumanity play itself out again in this cover up in Kamloops, right?
So there's to and fro with the church then. The Canadian government is saying, hey, at least we paid out compensation. If the kids are dead, how is that helping anybody? Who's being compensated? Is that just PR?
It makes me so angry. This is blood money. And I'll tell you, the only people who talk about compensation are the bought off Native chiefs. In all of the healing circles and all the protests I've ever done over the decades about this, none of the survivors on the ground ever talk about getting money. They say, well, what good is that going to do to me, right? They give you enough just to kill yourself with. Like the settlement was $10,000 top, if you can prove it happened. And if you sign an indemnification where you say the churches didn't do anything wrong and I'll never sue them. If you're willing to debase yourself and accept blood money and sell out the dead that way, then yeah, you get a pat on the head and $10,000. Now shut up and go away. I mean, it's inhuman. It's as inhuman as the crime itself. And yet white Canadians look at that, and even a lot of natives look at it, you know, in the official native world, you know, the lawyers and the chief and counsel who have been brainwashed in the white system. And they say, well, that's fair. You know, they got some money out of it. I mean, it's like trying to read poetry to a Neanderthal. I mean, how do you even communicate that humanity to people who don't feel it? And so we never looked at the system, and this is the point. You never ask for anything out of a really a satanic murderous system. You create that justice yourself. That's why we built these common law courts, making the citizen arrest. It's what forced this out in the open, that direct approach where we don't wait for the system, because it'll never respond except on its terms, which is to not, I have 3 words for it: kill, deny, repeat. You know, that's their system.
Do you have any survivors that would be willing to come on the show?
Yes. The fellow I spoke to yesterday, I don't want to say his name yet, but I will share it with you. He's a former policeman, a native policeman. And he's been in hiding, like a lot of them have to do. But here's the problem. A lot of the people I worked with are dead now. A lot of the people in the Unrepentant documentary, they're either dead or scattered. We were targeted in a huge way. And you know, when I get targeted, I get some bad things said about me and I can't find a job and I'm on a blacklist. Okay. If I was native, I'd be in a ditch 20 years ago. If you talk about this stuff, we've had 7 of our activists in Vancouver are native killed. The most blatant one being William Coombs killed by arsenic poisoning, according to the nurse Chloe Kirker, after he was about to, report this stuff about Queen Elizabeth taking those kids from the Kamloops school. I wouldn't be surprised if it was a Crown directive targeting the school for these digs to say, look, we've got to, deal with these claims that are going to be coming out about the Queen taking kids. Let's whitewash Kamloops first, right? And the next one they're going to try is the Mush Hole, where we dug, the other Anglican school in Brantford, Ontario, where these crimes are thoroughly documented. So in terms of survivors, I will do my best, but they're taking their life in their hands when they go public, right?
Really? Okay, we won't put them at risk.
Well, it's not. I don't want to speak for them. Well, all I can do is ask them if they're willing to and put you in touch with them. It's their decision, but they know what's at risk. They know it's they are risking their lives by talking about these things.
We can disguise people's faces and voices as well, if that would help the situation. Yeah. So how does this story unfold?
I hope they do come on, because you need to hear their voice.
Yeah, it will be very powerful. How does this story unfold now? Will more bodies be discovered? Will it continue to put pressure on the church to do an apology? Will the Pope come out and say something stronger? Or is everybody responsible just hoping it disappears out of the news?
Well, it doesn't matter what the Pope does. He's a convicted criminal. I don't really care what he says. He belongs in jail. If the church was ever going to do anything right, they would release all the secret documents, which they probably destroyed by now, identify where the graves are, mortgage their church property, and surrender it back to the native people. You've got to restore what was taken. Surrender themselves for prosecution. We need a Nuremberg trial in Canada to deal with this stuff, not run by the government, obviously, but by international agencies, by the people themselves. That's what we've been trying to do since our ITCCS was formed in 2010. And so, what we'll see playing out is this will be used as the token, look, we've looked in the ground. By definition, they can't look at any of the other sites because they've got to control it. They've got to control the information and the outcome. There won't be any evidence allowed to be released, which incriminates the church, which indicates serious crime like, sterilization and that. The British Columbia coroner has said he's going to show up and do analysis of the remains. Well, that's a kiss of death, because the BC coroner has a long history of covering up the deaths of Native people. They did it in the case of William Coombs, where nurse Chloe Kirker said he had all the lines on his fingernails of arsenic poisoning. He had none of the symptoms of TB. BC coroner says he died of tubercular meningitis. I mean, the cover-up is institutionalized, so you can't expect anything but things that serve them to be released publicly. That's why we need our own investigation. And I'm sure you've got the contact information for us, but murderbydecree.com is the essential thing for people to look at first.
So even Trudeau is calling on the church to release the documents and records of what happened at the schools. And he's intimated that he may use some government mechanism to force that. Is that just PR as well?
It's not just PR, it's incredible dissimulation, because Trudeau himself allowed the churches to destroy documents. He and his predecessor, Stephen Harper, set up the TRC, which allowed the government, when they announced the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and both the Liberals and the Tories agreed to this, the churches had a 6-month period where they could glean through their own records and sift out. It's like saying to the serial killer, well, go through the stuff and let us know what you want us to look at. That's exactly what happened with TRC. The government's allowed document destruction for decades. Now suddenly Trudeau's pretending none of that history exists, and he's relying on people's absolute ignorance of their own history. He's committing another obstruction of justice. In a just world, he'd be in prison for what he's doing, right? Because he's just colluding in a cover-up, which under the law is as serious as the crime itself, right?
Okay, what would you like to say in conclusion about this story then, specifically to the people who are watching and are concerned about this discovery of the 215 corpses?
Do not believe what you see on the corporate mainstream. Go to sources like ours. We're one of the few independent inquiries going on. We're working with independent, non-band council natives to bring up the truth. We also have promises of people we work with over the years in Europe and America to come as human rights observers to other sites that we're going to be going to. We're setting up our own forensic teams with a ground penetrating radar archaeologists to come in and analyze the remains. We're reviving the Canadian Genocide Tribunal with our own investigators. And write to us, the best place to write to is itccsoffice@protonmail.com. That's the International Tribunal of Crimes of Church and State, itccsoffice@protonmail.com, murderbydecree.com, and share that information you see. Our site, which I think you have, the bbsradio.com site, where we do our program every Sunday at 11 p.m. Greenwich time. That's where you can hear these eyewitnesses and others, the real information of what's coming out. Because if you allow them to get away with this, it's another nail in the coffin of these crimes that are ongoing, especially in the West Coast, where you've seen more and more of these Native families disappearing. So it's really essential that we organize at the grassroots to counter these official lies and crimes.
Absolutely brilliant as usual. And then the email you sent me earlier, there was a lot of links. Does that include everything you just described, or do you need to send anything else?
All right, folks. So that was the very first interview we did with Kevin Annett. As you can see, he is meticulously researched. He's a brilliant speaker. I hope you enjoyed that. But there are 3 more. And if you know, after listening to that, you can see why we've had to wait to publish this, because you cannot defame the dead. Let's just leave it at that. So I am going to find the other 2 right now and get those up as well. And I have sent Kevin an email, and I'm trying to get him on live today. So as soon as I hear back from him, folks, I will certainly let everybody know, and we'll get his thoughts on the death of Francis. Yes, so I can see everyone's been enjoying him in the chat. So the next one is a shorter one. It is about the Catholic Church, priests, the Vatican helping Nazis. And then we have got a 48-minute one after that. So let me just get this one up next. Here we go. Let me share the screen, and I'll remove myself, and we will go from there. Share screen. Oh, baby Ziggy's running in. Hello, Ziggy. There it is. Share screen. Play. Make it big.
How about you? Yeah.
Can everybody hear this one okay?
You've had some kind of banning and arrest order, have you?
Well, not me. It's the same court that forced Joe Ratzinger out of office in 2013. The International Common Law Court of Justice in Brussels reconvened and issued an arrest order on November 1st to Jorge Bergoglio, based on some pretty damning evidence that they've been gathering over the last 6 years. And so there's a summons to him to appear. There's also a bounty put on him. There's $10,000 offered to people who can assist in his arrest or in information leading to his prosecution. And also an offer of amnesty of any of his cohorts who'd like to give evidence. So it's quite serious. It's the same kind of move that forced his predecessor from office.
So with all of these findings of the corpses, are people now really waking up to?
All right, so I'm getting reports that the sound is too low. So what I'll do is I'll move over to the next one and put that one up, and hopefully the sound will be a lot better. What do you think, baby Ziggy? Baby Ziggy's watching me in here, making some very interesting sounds. What do you think of Kevin, baby Ziggy? Is he quite a character? He's quite a character. Yes. Right, let's see, content. So I do believe Andrew Gold hosted. There's a couple of them that we've got Kevin Annett and Covid and Big Farm. Obviously, we can't play that one. All right, so this was the most recent one that we did with him. And there we go. So let's see how the audio is on this one. Let's make it big.
You're here. Hi, Kevin. Nice to meet you. I'm Andrew.
Andrew, good to meet you.
Good to meet you. So What's going on? How you feeling? How you doing?
I think he does want to cuddle.
Terrific. We've got more good news coming out of Rome.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to get onto that. We will get onto that. But what would be great is just for the very few people who aren't aware, and I think most people are. Could you just describe your general background and accomplishments, as well as your recent campaign about Pope Francis's possible arrest when he visits Canada?
Well, it goes back a quarter of a century. I uncovered, as a clergyman on the west coast of Canada, Protestant minister, I met with a lot of Native people, and they were telling me their stories about killings and deaths of children in the local residential school. This was in the early 90s, before any of the lawsuits. So the church government responsible were free just to deny it all, right?
Yeah.
But I gave a forum to survivors in my church, and that caused my quick demise. I was not only thrown out of the church, but defrocked, blacklisted, my family destroyed over it. My wife was approached and offered money if she left me. She got custody of the kids. I mean, the usual thing they do with a whistleblower.
She took them, but she took the money.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. That all came out in divorce court, and later in my official defrocking trial, they freely admitted it, because they figure when you do that to somebody, they'll just crawl away and die somewhere. If you can't support yourself, if you've lost your family and good name publicly, that's usually what happens. But it actually invigorated me, and a lot of Native people then trusted me more because of what the church had done to me. And that's when I began to get invited to a lot of the healing circles. We started a campaign over 20 years that eventually forced Canada to admit to some degree of genocide. We also began a similar campaign in Europe that helped force Pope Benedict out of office in 2013 through a common law court trial. So it really triggered a lot of the stuff that's going on now, and planted a lot of seeds that are now sprouting really all over the world.
Fantastic. Oh my God. I can't get over that it feels like a Coen Brothers movie or something, that they went and approached your wife and said, leave him and we'll give you money.
Well, it's what, if you meet people who've been blacklisted, people who lived through the McCarthy era, periods of extreme repression, like now, right? Yeah. It's a standard op, it's how you do it. You break a man's or a woman's family, personal ties, support, finances. There's an internet smear campaign on me that goes back over 20 years, started by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police after we did our first tribunal in Vancouver into these crimes in so-called residential schools back in '98.
Wow. So what actually, for those who don't really know, what was going on with the abuse in Canada?
Well, it was a plan of outright genocide. It was started in the late 1880s. An act of parliament forced all Native children to be interned in what they called residential schools. They were death camps, really. Half the children never came back. And the government even admits that now by their own statistics. A lot of it's at murderbydecree.com, all the documentation of this. But it went on till 1996. That's when the last school closed. Over 60,000 children never came back. And nobody ever knew about this. A lot of white people and Natives knew about it, but of course, Natives aren't going to talk or they'll die. And their own chiefs were involved in suppressing the evidence, the government-funded chiefs. A lot of the white people knew, but it's kind of like, talking to Germans after World War II, like, oh, we didn't know anything. We couldn't smell what was coming out of the death camp. And so it was this kind of massive group crime and group denial. But our evidence was so irrefutable, eyewitnesses, documentation, things they eventually had to admit, that people couldn't deny it. All they could do is try to marginalize and discredit me. Because if I was Aboriginal, I'd be dead years ago. That can happen in Canada because Natives aren't citizens under the law. They're wards of the state, like a child under the law. That's why so many of them die every year and nothing's ever happened.
Well, even now?
Oh, yeah, because under the Indian Act, they're, like I say, they're not citizens. They have, the same status as a child or a mentally incompetent person under the law. So there's no legal consequence if you kill a Native in Canada. Like the number of times as a street minister in Vancouver and other places, worked with so many down and out Natives, constant stories of, and these are even make into the mainstream press, Mounties or police emptying their revolver into homeless Indians in an alley, just killing them, and no consequence. They're not even reprimanded.
it happens so much. It's an ongoing war because, of course, natives are still sitting on valuable resources, especially on the West Coast, where China is buying up a lot of the oil, the uranium, the water, the lumber. And so native people are expendable because they're in the way of that big money operation.
Wow. And so what can we do? How do we go about changing that? Obviously, that's what your life's work is about right now.
Well, we've succeeded in, we not only forced Pope Benedict out of office and a lot of this into the public light, but Queen Elizabeth and others that were named in the court case in 2012, 2013, under international law, when it proves that whether it's the British Crown or these various churches in the Vatican are all involved in not only a crime against humanity, but then trying to conceal it, they've lost their authority. Their authority is nullified and they can be arrested. There's a thing at the UN called the Transnational Criminal Organization Act. And the Vatican qualifies as a TNCO. It launders money for organized crime. It is involved in genocide over the centuries, in the arms trade, big investor in big pharma, Pfizer and the others, GlaxoSmithKline. And the present Pope Francis, the reason he got into office was as a head of the Jesuit order in Argentina. He was active with the military junta during the 1970s and 80s during the Dirty War, where they killed over 30,000 of their own citizens. And Bergoglio, from Francis, his job was to go all over the world and whitewash the junta and traffic children of political prisoners who were in jail, which is an old practice of the Catholic Church. They did it during the Franco dictatorship in Spain. And that's how he got up his cardinal hat. And then he was put in because his predecessor, Joseph Ratzinger, Pope Benedict, he was so implicated and he looked like the evil emperor, You have to bring in the spin operation, Smiley Francis, to put the spin on the thing. But the point is he's brought a lot of more heat on the Vatican. And that's some of our recent news that I wanted to mention. Wow.
So that's fascinating. I lived in Argentina for 7 years. And so they still talk, a lot about the 30,000 disappeared. They call them the disappeared people and threw people out of helicopters and stuff like that. It was really grim, wasn't it?
Well, Bergoglio even arranged during the Falklands War in 1982. He's the one who arranged for the Argentine junta to buy Exocet missiles through Vatican Bank funding. And that also won him favor with the junta, right?
Did you hear about, recently there was that money hidden in a monastery as well. It's always religion in Argentina. There's this sort of weird relationship they have. I think it was a group of nuns were involved in helping a politician, I think it was Christina Kirchner, the president, to hide like $10 million or something like that. So deep history of Catholicism and bad stuff. Ooh, no good.
Absolutely. Well, religion is the perfect cover for organized crime. It's, considered above the law, and they are. The Catholic Church has its own laws, and they're not subject to the laws of different nations, at least in their own mind. And a lot of governments cooperate with that because of Catholic voters and the money and everything. There's even a policy in the Catholic Church called Crimen Solicitanis. It goes back to 1929. It says when children are raped, nobody is to be told. The police are not to be told, and everyone is silenced. And if you break that vow, it's like in the mafia, omerta, the law of silence. If you break the silence, you're excommunicated, which to a Catholic means you go to hell, right? So God doesn't like a snitch. God wants to protect child rapists in the church, right? And every Catholic is bound by that policy. And the present Pope, despite his liberal demeanor, he backs that 100%. As a matter of fact, what's mind-blowing is he went to the United States a few years ago and he spoke to Congress, right, joint session of Congress. Well, he beatified, that is, turned into a saint, a missionary called Junipero Serra, who was in California in the late 1700s. This guy worked to death over 100,000 native people, men, women, children, on these Franciscan plantations. And he's turned into a saint by Bergoglio and Pope Francis. And he says, we are inspired by his zeal, right? So it's still the attitude that if you're not a Catholic, you don't have the right to live. And that's what explains the massive wiping out of so many children. It was all legal. It was all according to church policy. Right?
I think what's particularly sneaky about Pope Francis is when he came in, I seem to remember, and I'm not an expert on this, because I'm just going off my memory, that he was seen as the progressive Pope who didn't mind maybe homosexuality and a few things like that. And I think, did that gradually sort of change over the years now?
Oh yeah, well, I mean, like, look what happened in America. You had Bush, and then you had Obama come in. Whoever
Mhm.
follows the nasty guy is automatically good in everyone's minds. It's classic spin doctrine, right?
Yeah.
Damage control, and they did it, with billions of dollars at their disposal. They can do whatever they want, and people believe them, right?
They do. They do. It's something about that. It's a very human thing, and it's at our, humans at our worst, I suppose. It's that hiding under the cloak of righteousness, and as you pointed out, that could be religion. It's a perfect guise for doing evil things, and there are other ways that we try to show each other that we're good. I suppose I'm going back to an evolutionary tribe. I'm thinking if you had virtue, you might get more of the food. People would give you food if they could see you were a good person, but you didn't need to actually be a good person. You just needed to convince the others that you were. And I suppose that's what the Catholic Church and many other churches and religions dress up as. Actually, yeah. So how does it feel for you? I mean, did you know about a lot of this stuff back when you were working? What did you say as a minister? I never know the right words to use for church things.
Minister, pastor, whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Were you conscious of these things? Were you battling with sort of a two sides thing?
I knew, yeah, right. I knew in general about the history of genocide by the Christian churches, but my attitude was, look, we can turn that around. That's why when I learned about the residential school crimes, I immediately wrote to the church.
Yeah.
I mean, the church was selling off a lot of land that their missionaries had stolen. They'd sold it off to big logging companies and that. I mean, this is standard. The churches do this all the time. So I wrote a letter about that very naively, and that's what got me fired, right? Because the last place you can practice the teachings of Christ is in the Christian churches, because they're big corporations, and in practice, it's like democracy. It's fine in theory. If you go ahead and practice it, look out, right? You start stepping on big toes, right?
But how were you fight? So they were just like, look, you're poking your head around, in things that are not your business. You're trying to be a good person. We don't like that. You're fired.
Well, they gave me warnings. It's kind of like, it was like out of a bad B script gangster movie. Some guys visited me before, fellows in my congregation. They were big loggers, right? And they said, you have a wife and two daughters, and it would be really bad if something happened to your family. I mean, they were that blatant, right? And
oh my God.
right. And so it was quick after that.
It's just disgusting. So it's like, I'd love to know what's going on again, going back to sort of cognitive bias and stuff with these people. I presume they think they're the good people and they're working on behalf of God, or do you think they know we're bad people, but we just don't care what happens to the indigenous people?
I don't think morality enters into it, because human beings are extremely flexible when it comes to morals. And we found in history of genocide, a lot of, there's a classic case, Robert Jackson, who was the U.S. prosecutor at Nuremberg, was speaking to a Jewish congregation in Manhattan after World War II. And he said something that really got them upset. He said, the SS were no different than you and I, because 99% of us put in that situation would do the same thing, because in the corporate hierarchy, everyone copies what happens at the top, and responsibility is so segmented. You can defer responsibility to somebody else. Well, I only drove the truck. I didn't kill these kids. Well, I fed them, and so it's only a few who are like psychopathic killers. The rest go along, and that's always the issue, right? But fortunately, that's being turned around to some degree.
Yeah, there was that great quote. I can't remember his name now. I want to say Levi something, and it was, monsters are scary, but I am paraphrasing in a very awful, rubbish, simplistic way. Monsters are scary, but there are far too few of them. It's the ones that are just going along, which a lot of us do. And it's so difficult, because we might point our fingers at certain people and say they're just going along with atrocities, but we all have different values.
It's inherent in if you look back in European culture, it's part of the culture. Genocide, child killing, there's nothing criminal about it. It's the operational tools of church and state over many centuries. So it's good in that it allows us to look in the mirror at who we are, things we've, you can live alongside these crimes for a long time, your whole life, and not even know they're going on, because you don't want to know they're going on.
Yeah, that's much easier, actually, isn't it? Much easier to. I watched a film about everyday Nazis. It's just come out called Final Accounts, and it's about the everyday Nazis back then. It's the last generation of them who are still alive now, and it's amazing how they do sort of shrug and say, "Oh, we didn't know," and every now and then someone says, "We did know. We all knew." It's so fascinating because they can't. A lot of them don't want to accept it. It would mean that they're bad people, I guess.
Well, Canadians have had to look at it because we've just kept up this campaign. And what I relate this to what I started with. On November 1st, the common law court that convicted Ratzinger in 2013 and forced him and 3 cardinals out of office, they issued an arrest warrant against Pope Francis based on new evidence that came out that he was directly involved in the death of eyewitnesses in Argentina to his crimes and other locations, and his direct involvement in what's called the Ninth Circle, which is a verified sacrificial network that operates in the Catholic Church, goes back over 300 years. This is from Vatican Insiders, documents from the Vatican Library. It's been published for a number of years. On the basis of that arrest warrant, 10 different indigenous tribes in Canada said, okay, if he comes on our territory, he's going to be arrested. He's banished. He's not allowed to come here. So really everything hit the fan after that, because then the Canadian bishops backed off and they actually said, maybe it's not a good idea for you to come here, because over the last year, over 24 Catholic churches have been burned down in Canada. Native people are ordering them off their land. They're saying, get out. Wow. You've murdered all our children. And the Kamloops school, where these mass graves were uncovered in May, which was a whole story of how that happened. But he said he was going to go to Kamloops to issue an apology. The Shuswap and Chilcotin people around Kamloops, the Native people, have said, don't come here or you're going to be arrested. And as a result, now Bergoglio's backed off. He's summoned 13 puppet Native leaders to come to Rome on December 20th. And what we found out that actually the next day there's a conclave happening of all the cardinals to figure out how to deal with this. Well, December 21st and 22nd are high points in the satanic calendar, ritual killings. We know they happen at a place called San Lorenzo Jesuit Church in Rome, just down from the Vatican.
By whom? Who does this? Who's doing these pagan rituals?
Pope's cardinals. They're expected to be part of the Ninth Circle.
Wow.
The Ninth Circle refers to Dante's Inferno, the 9 circles of hell.
Right, of course,
and at the center of the Ninth Circle is Satan and those who have betrayed a sacred trust, which you do with children, right? It's this belief that it's a spiritual vampirism off the suffering of children. We've had eyewitnesses describing their participation in these things and Vatican verification that this stuff goes on. So we think all of this happened on December 20th to 22nd is part of that. It's also solstice, which is another high point, the satanic calendar. And we believe this is going to be happening. The natives are coming to give them, cover to make it look like Native people are on the side of the church. But even those Native puppets are going, they've been told by their elders, if you go to Rome, you're going to be arrested too. We don't want anything to do with this child killing institution. They deserve to be put on trial. The Pope needs to be put on trial, this guy, for the crimes of his church going back centuries.
Yeah, and there are many different kinds of crimes. I mean, this is something I didn't even know too much about. And what's really strange is when you go to Kamloops school, obviously I knew I was interviewing you and I had a look and I went on the Wikipedia and there's so much of just like, well, it's a pretty normal school and these are the people that go there, la-di-da. And then suddenly, cultural genocide. And, it's almost like slipped in there. You're like, cultural what? And then
they add the adjective to soften it, cultural genocide. But
yeah, well, that's interesting. I was going to ask you about that. So what does that mean?
Oh, cultural. The original definition of genocide at the UN was there's cultural, biological, and physical. Cultural is you wipe out a language and the identity of a people. Biological is sterilizations, medical experiments, things like that. Physical is you just line them up against the wall and kill them. Well, all 3 happened in Canadian residential schools. It's been documented at our first tribunal in June of 1998. All of this stuff was documented. Read murderbydecree.com. All of the testimonies and evidence are in there. It's all online. But what this whole thing about Kamloops is Kamloops was one of these special treatment centers, right? Where children who were very rebellious were sent. And it was the center of a lot of MK Ultra mind control experiments, drug testing, including pharma companies like Pfizer, GlaxoSmithKline in Britain. They were using children and killing them en masse to do the drug testing protocols going back to World War II. And Kamloops, you see, the RCMP and the government have been, and the churches have been going around for many decades destroying the mass grave sites of Native children. We uncovered one at the Brantford Anglican School back in 2011, and we published a list of 28 of these mass grave sites. Well, the Mounties were coming into Kamloops last May to do their usual number of wiping out the site before the Pope could come, right? So there wouldn't be any incriminating evidence. Well, two of the members of the Kamloops Band Council spilled the beans. They went to the press with it. The story went viral all over the planet, as you can remember. And then suddenly people say, oh, there are mass graves of children. Well, yeah, going back a long time. But the government then did a spin on it to make it look like we're doing a serious investigation here at this grave, when they're not. You can't get into the site. You can't even photograph it. The Mounties, the people who put those children in the ground, are investigating themselves. And, they're trying to wipe this out again. But there's too many people watching it now. And the Native people now saying, we're going to shut this down. They're occupying churches all over the country, Native people on their reservations. They're burning them down. They're taking them over, which you can do with a convicted transnational corporate criminal organization like the Vatican.
My word. And so I read that over 4,000 children died in the residential school system. I imagine you'd wager it's higher than that, but that's just an official figure.
That's Holocaust denial on a huge scale. 4,000, 3,000 to 4,000 means 1% of them died. Their own statistics going back to 1907 and documents, you can see it on my site, show the average death rate was between 40 and 60%. And in some place, there's an article from the front page of the Ottawa Citizen newspaper, November 15th, 1907. 69% of the children died, 2/3. That's higher than in the death camps of Europe. It's higher than the Black Death or the slave trade. Massive wiping out. And so for them to say 3,000 or 4,000, it's a crime against humanity to even claim that.
Is it something you've seen a lot, that number bandied around?
Everywhere, because the government and the churches set up their own investigation called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. As part of the mandate of the TRC, it said, you can't take down as evidence any statement about the death of a child. Hello? They censored any reference to a massive killing off. They censored statements about children burying other children. And yet they call that an investigation. It was a huge whitewash. And that's why I wrote this in response, Murder by Decree. That's the hardcover. And it's all online. It's DVDs, all the evidence. But it's totally censored out of the Canadian press. You never hear any of this real story. You always hear the fabricated account.
You got to come places like Sean Atwood's Patreon and YouTube to get it out there.
That's right.
He's got quite some following though, doesn't he? So it's good.
Yes. Thankfully.
Where can people find Murder by Decree?
It's online, murderbydecree.com. You can just download it. It's also at Amazon. All my books, all 18 books of mine, just put in Kevin Annett. You'll see it there.
Yeah. God, imagine writing 18 books. That's a lot of writing.
Well, I had inspiration.
There's a lot you needed to say.
It runs in the family. My dad and grandfather were both writers. But
I've gone fuzzy, haven't I? I've gone out of.
Pardon me?
I've gone fuzzy. I've gone out. Oh, I'm back. I went out of focus.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. But yeah, sorry, you were saying about your family writers.
Oh no, they're just it's a tradition of writers in our family. Actually, one of my ancestors was Peter Annett, who was a free-thinking philosopher in London in the 1760s. He was a deist. Like, he wrote these pamphlets challenging the teachings of the Church of England, and he ended up in the stocks and in hard labor for a year when he was 70. So I said to people, this runs in the family. Yeah, it's just kind of...
Wow, what a history! What a family history, man. Okay, well, people should check out the books and all that. It's interesting what you were saying about the numbers as well. Again, that reminded me of Argentina, because I ended up doing a documentary with a woman who was the daughter of the right-hand man of Videla, who was the sort of head of the dictatorship and stuff in Argentina. And I put it to her, 30,000 disappeared. And she was like, well, those are the figures you're getting. And I was like, what do you mean? And I didn't realize there was a whole, other side where they're saying it's like 1,000 or 2,000. And it's just... Yeah.
That's standard ops for a genocidal regime. They do that all the time. So in a way, this cover up and everything shouldn't be surprising to people if you know either a history of that church or the history of any genocidal nation, right?
Bloody hell. So these kids for decades and decades they're going to these schools. They're forced to go to the schools. Is that right? So the parents will know what the schools are like because they had to go to them themselves, right?
But by law, since 1891 in Canada, you had to, or you go to jail. And the accounts, when you read murderbydecree.com, the Mounties would come in. There'd be a whistle that people would hear. The Mounties would come in on their gunboat, knock down and sometimes kill the parents if they're in the way, gather up the children like it's a slave auction, had them all tied together, put them on the boat, never see them again. Half of them never came back. And those who did are too messed up, to even have any kind of normal life after that. Suicide rate is enormous among survivors. The net effect is huge in the culture. But anyway, when you read the accounts of these things, it's like reading things out of Auschwitz. It's no different. Chemical experimentation, sexual sterilization programs. Anyone who spoke their own language or who was a traditionalist would get sterilized. If you had high marks, you got a red tag and you had to report to the Indian hospital, and you were put under an X-ray machine, or you had, direct means of sterilizing people. And a lot of the Nazis who did this in Europe came to Canada after the war and continued their work here. So that Canada had more Nazis come into their country than any country in the world after World War II, because they were brought down to the U.S. through the back door, Project Paperclip.
Again, I thought that was Argentina. Again, not to keep obsessing over Argentina, because that is another place they used to go.
Right. Yeah.
Oh man. So it's just they start, they went from at that point from the Jews, and then they went to what is the appropriate word for Indigenous Canadians? Does one say?
No, people have names for themselves. They're all different nations. It's like saying, do you have a name for Europeans? Well, there's different nations: Shuswap, Chilcotin, Cree. My family were intermarried with the Anishinaabe or Ojibwe in central Canada. I'm Métis, which is mixed blood.
That's interesting.
Yeah, there's over 3 million people in Canada who are either native or mixed blood, and like 10% of the population, right? But they all have their own names for themselves, and part of the difficulty is that it was such a system of divide and conquer, even within a family. They would take 5 children, put them in these death camps called the residential schools, and they'd each be given a different last name, so that no one will know who their brother is, their sister is. The boys and girls couldn't mix. If they did, they were usually beaten to death or starved. Starvation was a constant method. They would often just not feed the kids, and they would die off en masse, or put the sick and the healthy together and never treat them. So TB would spread. It's what killed so many. Dr. Peter Bryce reported about this in 1909 in a national report that got him fired. They're open about this. The evidence is everywhere, but people won't believe it, right? Because the criminals are still in power. So what are you going to do?
Yeah, there was that fascinating film as well, Denial, about the Holocaust, about a Holocaust denier, and it was a true story. I can't remember what his name was, the famous historian, a British historian who he sued
Irving. David Irving.
That's right. Yeah. He sued an American female professor because she said he was a Holocaust denier and he was lying, and he said, prove that it happened. And it was the film is fascinating because it's much harder to prove than they thought, because all the evidence was gotten rid of, and all you have is first person testimonies from people who were there. But
absolutely, and that's very analogous to the situation in Canada, because the whole country is in a state of genocide denial, right? And it's institutionalized. If you look in any of the school books, this book is continually removed out of the libraries. It's not allowed to be in the school curriculum. We've tried time and again with school boards and teachers. They're just not allowed to have it.
What do they say to you?
Pardon me?
What do they say to you about it?
They don't say anything. It just vanishes. They don't respond. It's the whole marginalization campaign. 90% of the stuff we did is being wiped off the internet. It's a continual process of reminding people what happened. As a memory, a la George Orwell, memory gets swiped every 5 minutes, And the worst thing is that people don't want to believe it. And so they'll believe anybody who's denying it, right?
Yeah. I guess we don't want collective guilt on our part. We don't want another thing that we did. We don't want to admit it. Up until when was this going on?
Officially, the last school closed in 1996, but the point is it was just privatized. After that, it's still going on now. More children, Native children, get taken from their families that never happened in the residential school area. They're put in white foster homes where the chance of being raped or tortured or everything is like 500 times higher than if they stayed in their own home. But it's a whole system of really child trafficking going on off all the reservations. It's an ongoing genocide in that sense.
So that's still going on.
I see it all the time. One example, when I was working out of the Sweetgrass Center, which is a native drop-in in downtown Vancouver, where you meet countless survivors, all over the place. One native woman came in one day and said, they just took all 5 of my children. They just came in and took them all. And there's 2 standards. You couldn't do that if they were non-native. You had to go get a court order and all this stuff. Natives, you can grab and take the kids all the time. Even she was breastfeeding her baby and they took the baby away. And we know what happens. And then the Catholic Church is one of the biggest child trafficking agencies in the world.
Yeah.
Again, I go into that in great detail in part 2 of my my book. But
to be honest, I'm absolutely shocked and outraged now. I feel quite angry about all of this.
Good.
Yeah. But fascinating as well. I'm glad you do the work you do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the point is that it isn't any different than what's happening to people now. I'd like to make this point with people that mandatory vaccination has been the law in Canada since 1874 when it comes to Indians on reservation. You cannot refuse a shot in the arm or medical treatment or you go to jail. So the COVID measures are really based on an Indian Act kind of thing where you're not a citizen with rights. You're just an appendage of the state and they can do whatever they want to you. There's no appeal. There's no rule of law. And they're now applying that to everybody. So I say, if you ignore that done to one group, it's going to blow back on you. It's going to happen to all of us, right? And sure enough, look what's happening. Right?
Is there a different policing system for Indigenous groups?
Well, they're expected to police themselves. On reservation, they have tribal police and the chief. They're all accountable to the government. And their job is to really, for example, they have a quota of number of people they have to force off reservation every year to grab the land, right? Because homeless Indians are a lot easier to kill off or use and traffic than if they're on reservation where you have certain rights. So, I mean, it's when you look into it, it's like the Sonderkommando in Auschwitz, the Jews who beat other Jews into the gas ovens. I mean, and like you say about the David Irving case, so much of it was wiped out. As far back as 1960, the government of Canada put out a directive. They sent out document destruction teams to wipe out any evidence of deaths of children, accident reports, principals reports. I only found a bit of that had survived. And that's a lot of the evidence in here. After I got thrown out of the United Church, I started a PhD at the University of British Columbia. And it was the one place in Canada where they had a lot of documents from the original residential schools, microfilmed evidence. And I grabbed a lot of that stuff before they wiped it out. And now if you try to find it, it's being wiped out everywhere. And people say, well, only Kevin Annett has this stuff. Well, yeah, because they've destroyed it in all the other sources, right?
Yeah. They think you're like, what was his name who started the Mormons? Joseph Smith.
Joseph Smith. Well, it's interesting you mentioned Mormons because they're closely tied to the Vatican and these ritual sacrificial cults. We've had Mormons. We've got a whole group working now with Mormons to document exactly the same crimes happening among Mormon children. And they just had a private audience. The head of the Mormons, he had a private audience last year with Pope Francis, opened a big Mormon temple in downtown Rome. Well, we know that for a fact that's where some of these 9 circle rituals are happening. And they might be happening there. I mentioned earlier, December 21st, 22nd, that cultic.
Yeah.
Period, could be in the Mormon church temple in Rome as well.
Love to be a fly on the wall.
Well, we have people who are flies on the wall. We have Vatican sources. We have people in the church and in the police and everything who keep giving us this information. But, people are always concerned about their pensions and if they might die. We've had police who come forward who have been killed for exposing this stuff in Canada. So it's your only defense is be as public as possible and get the evidence out immediately. And then if something happened to me, they'd know, hey, we know who did it, right?
Yeah, but what can we do?
Well, lots of things. People can do a lot of things. They can stop going to these churches, stop giving them money. When a few of us started occupying churches in Canada, it broke the back. Within 2 weeks, the government started making noises about apologies and their Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It was March 2008. We had just hit a lot of churches on Sunday morning. We went in there and didn't budge. And it made the headlines. The church freaked right out. And the apology came out of that, because if you hit what they love, their money and their public image, it doesn't matter how small you are. So I often say to people, we can do a lot. It's just that we've been conditioned to think we can't, right?
Yeah. I mean, the funny thing is that you would think this is right up Trudeau's street, you know, to publicly denounce something that's happened to a minority group.
Well, no. Justin's a Jesuit-trained puppet. As a matter of fact, it's interesting. If we have the time, I should just mention this. His father, Pierre Trudeau, also Jesuit-educated, former Prime Minister of Canada. He was very good friends with a guy called John Seeley, who was a U.S. sociologist, worked for MK Ultra. He was a CIA contract agent. He lived in the Trudeau home with all three Trudeau sons, including the one who died of a, quote, skiing accident, which is kind of a code word for, but to rise up through these cults, you've got to sacrifice one of your children. Often kill them personally, but anyway, we think that's what happened. But Justin Trudeau has all the signs of a Manchurian candidate-controlled politician. Look at his eyes sometimes. Look what he says. He's very crafted. As a matter of fact, we know there's a woman, Anne Diamond, who's a survivor in Montreal of the MK Ultra experiments at the Ellen Memorial Institute. And she said she knows the handler of the Trudeau children, not only John Seeley, but one of the doctors there worked all the time to program the Trudeau kids, right? Because they knew he was going to be, arranged to be the prime minister one day. And, again, this stuff, if you scratch anywhere, boom, this stuff comes up. It's amazing how much evidence there is, right?
Wow. Yeah. Well, we scratched a bit with Trudeau, and then there was all the blackface stuff he did, wasn't there?
Oh, I mean, the guy's it's really pathetic. I mean, when you think of what happened to him at a young age, no doubt. But, I see it everywhere. Well, it is, but I mean, the impact that he has is still very destructive. I mean, he, like Joe Biden did that fawning display in Rome when he goes over. It was grounds for impeachment. I mean, you're not supposed to mix church and state like that in the U.S. Constitution. There he is applauding Bergoglio in Rome, right? And, this is all part of the same, like Big Pharma, 5.7 billion invested in Pfizer alone. The Vatican Bank has that much money, right? And Francis said, everybody needs to get the shot. He said, it's a moral imperative for everyone in the world to get the shot. And he thinks there should be a government authority, a singular government authority in the world to impose that on everyone. That's the liberal Pope speaking, right? So he's a big backer of the one world government, one world religion, like Biden and Trudeau.
It's crazy. Yeah, it's crazy. There's so much stuff I didn't know about. Describe to me the involvement of Indigenous people in your campaigns, like in the movement to establish a federation of sovereign nations in a new Republic of Canada. That's something that's fascinating.
It goes back a ways. I mean, there was an attempted republic established in Canada in 1837. We had our own rebellion, but it got crushed. And as a matter of fact, my great-great-great-grandfather took part in it, Philip Annett. Again, runs in the family, right?
It's great I should just say, it's great that you've got this. I don't know anything beyond 2 generations ago in my family, and you've got this sort of line, and that's really great to have.
Well, yeah, it takes some digging, but there was an attempted revolution that got crushed, and the republic in Canada has been a very long idea. A lot of the Native people who are involved in our campaign, they're not involved with the government money. They're not the tribal chiefs or anything. They're the traditionalists, like the clan mothers. They call them the blue bloods, the traditional people who tend to get targeted all the time. The missing women in British Columbia, and that they tend to be from that lineage. And a lot of the Native people on the ground support this work. And we've had support for this movement to establish a Republic of Canada. And that's another site, republicofcanada.ca, people should read. But it's the natural outgrowth of the exposure of genocide, because Elizabeth Windsor has lost her authority, and the Governor General, they're convicted criminal bodies. We need an alternative. And what better one than to have a federation of equal nations, which we've never had in Canada. It's all been just the colonial system imposed on everyone, really.
I'm just going to move my head so that I can get it. It goes fuzzy, and I
You're
need
going
it
fuzzy,
goes
are you?
out of focus. Yeah. Oh, I've nearly got it back because I'm there. Sorry, you're seeing my face right up close now.
That's all right.
Maybe I should. I don't know. I don't want to refresh it. Okay, I'm refreshing the screen. Okay, 1 second. Sorry, bear with me. Technical issues. Reload.
So I've just found one
As long as you
more.
have fuzzy to yourself, that's what matters.
I've just found one more Kevin interview, which I will be playing shortly.
Oh, it's still fuzzy. Yeah, well, I do need to sit still. Someone sent a message saying sit still. That's why I've gone out of focus. Hang on, let me try this.
Maybe if you sit back.
Oh, hang on, I clicked.
There you go.
Now you can
You're
see.
clear. Coming in clear.
Okay, we're back. I'm so sorry about that, Kevin.
No, it's not your fault.
Yeah, but yeah, this bloody camera. Fascinating. So, how are you? What I was thinking as you were saying is, how are you spelling Canada?
Kanata. It's a
Kanata.
Mohawk word originally. Ganata. K's a
Is that where
pronunciation.
Canada comes from?
Yes, it does. It means officially means our village, but in Mohawk, the word translates out as where the people sit as one around the council fire. So it's the notion that we're equal here, and it's in our flag of the Republic. It's got 3 stars: French, English, Indigenous, founding nations, and then it's got these blue borders, which it's called the Tuo Wampum. It was the original treaty signed between us and the natives, and it said we will share the land equally. Our boats will go down side by side, down the river side by side, not one over the other. And that's the notion, really, of the Republic, that the only way you can undo genocide is not with a bit of money and apology, which is stupid. You've got to change what caused it. You know, people need their land back. We need to get rid of this rule by decree, right? In Canada, 2/3 of the laws are passed by order in council, by the Privy Council. Probably the same in England. Bloody Privy Council passes laws. The Parliament never even sees them. That's how the Indian Act, the COVID measures, they all came in. All these genocidal measures. So we need to get away from that. We need to establish real self-governance for the first time. And over half of Canadians want an end to ties with the crown. There's a big movement for it. There's a big groundswell. And I think that's why the Pope and the bishops and everybody and Trudeau are so nervous, because they know that, their own existence is on the line, right? Over this.
And the crown being my grandma Elizabeth the second. No, she's not really. I don't know her.
Oh, you're related?
It's funny. Some Canadians, especially obviously when they're tourists in the UK, are big fans of the monarchy, and they often ask me about it, and I say I don't have a clue. I don't know about any of them.
Well, it's often we see that in the press, but you talk to a lot of Canadians. Well, I'm half American, so it's I don't have any love lost towards monarchs, whether religious or secular, but there is a lot of discontent these days, like you see everywhere, really, in Canada.
I mean, what is the answer to that? I mean, if you have to, I don't know. It just feels like, in some senses, it just feels like more division by creating sort of different. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but division is part of nature. That's how cells grow. Things separate.
Sure.
Wheat from the chaff. To make things clear, it happens in a family, it happens in a church. When you start talking about something real, people get divided. And the whole pressure is don't cause division. That's what I was told as a minister all the time. Don't divide your congregation. It's the worst thing to do. Even if it means covering up the death of children, you're not supposed to, divide people, get them upset, because then they might think for themselves. And you can't have that in churches or in society generally, right?
Do you think Pope Francis ever will be held responsible? Will he be arrested? Will anything happen?
There was an attempt in Geneva a couple of years ago to arrest him. Came very close. The way you arrest these people is to shut down their institution. I mean, they're figureheads. Ultimately, he doesn't even hold authority. It's the Curia, the College of Cardinals. But they've got to lose their tax-exempt status. They've got to have the papal nuncios expelled from every nation. They've got to be held under one law for everyone, not this special law where child rapists can get away with it. It's just simple common sense and common law, right?
Yeah. It is. I'd love to see that. What can you imagine? Imagine the scenes. Imagine the newspaper headlines, and they'd be praising you. They'd be going, "You knew first, maybe."
Well, nobody expected Pope Benedict to step down, first pope in 600 years. Nobody expected Canada to ever admit genocide. I mean, this happened because of people on the ground giving up a lot and struggling and risking their lives and sometimes losing their lives. Like 7 of our native people in Canada were killed for this stuff. The most infamous one being William Coombs, who saw Queen Elizabeth take 7 boys and 3 girls out of the Kamloops residential school, and they were never seen again. October 10th, 1964, she was on a royal visit to Canada then. William testified about that. He was to come to London to talk about it, and 2 days before he left the country, he was killed. Ordered to report, actually dragged by Mounties to St. Paul's Catholic Hospital, and he was dead the next day. And his nurse, Chloe Kirker, said he had all the symptoms of arsenic poisoning in the fingernails and his whole disposition. But tuberculosis was put down. Tubercular meningitis, cause of death. She said he had no symptoms of TB. So, I mean, it happens. That's why if I was native, I wouldn't be here, right? But all they can do with me is try to marginalize, discredit. But you can't, the truth has a power all of its own, and it changes and moves mountains. You just have to trust in it. And
Hope.
And whatever higher force you believe in, I know there's a hidden hand here, right? It's like I don't know if you know about this one, but I was in Rome in October 2009, and I did a ceremony at the Vatican, and it turned into an exorcism, basically, right? Because I'd been involved once before in an exorcism. And
me too.
Did you? Oh, really? We'll have to share notes. But
yeah,
I brought some soil from a Catholic residential school, mass grave, and I called out that entity in Rome. And it was funny because I was in the middle of St. Peter's Square. And normally you're arrested if you try anything there. And these cops were walking by me like I was invisible or something, right? But didn't touch me. Next day, a tornado hits the center of Rome for the first time in over 40 years. You can look it up, October 12th, 2009. And we got pictures and articles about all that. But that same week, after the tornado hits, the European press started reporting for the first time Pope Benedict's role in covering up child trafficking. So that first stage in an exorcism, you're calling the entity to reveal itself. Well, guess what? It's all in the open now. What is in the middle of Bergoglio's name? G-O-G, Gog, Bergoglio. In Gog and Magog in the Bible are the worldly powers that ally with Satan to deceive humanity in the book of Revelation. And I mean, it's all out in the open. You just see it for what it is, but people don't want to believe it, right?
They don't. But this conversation will bring them slightly closer to believing it. And we're out of time now. The perfect timing, that. Thank you so much, Kevin. And yeah, I say we. Sean will have you back on. He told me to say that very soon. He loves having you on.
Okay. I appreciate it, Andrew. It's been a great interview. Thank you.
Oh, it's been lovely. Thank you, Kevin. We'll speak off of outside.
Hey, thank you for watching that one, everybody. We have got another one. If you've just tuned in, I'm going through the series of interviews we did with Kevin Annett, who's exposed a lot of royal and Vatican crimes. And we've had to wait for certain people to be deceased before we could re-release them. And as you know, the news today, we're able to release these now. And I've emailed Kevin, and I'm hoping that he's going to respond and we can get him on tonight. That would be fantastic. But here's another 30 minutes one. I mean, the level of research he does. He was a priest himself, a whistleblower, so he knows it from the inside out. And he's so well researched and so articulate. He's one of our best guests. But we've not been able to have him on for a while. But I endeavor to try and get him on tonight or at least later this week. So if you'd like Kevin on live answering your questions, put a 1 in the chat. If you want Kevin to bog off, put a 2 in the chat. Ziggy's running around the room cheering here, so I think he wants him on. Anyway, without any further ado, let's go over to the next one. This one's called Vatican Crimes Against Humanity. Oh yeah, I've added all of Kevin's links in the description box as well. And there's a few banned ones I can't post. I'll probably put them on my Patreon and stuff. But anyway, all the links are down there if you're interested in his book or if you want to reach out to him. But yeah, here's the next one, folks. Let's go. Let me know.
Next up, Kevin Annett. This guy really hits hard on things, as seen in our previous interviews with Kevin. Here he comes.
Hi, Sean.
Hey, Kevin, how are you doing?
It's good now. Can you hear me better this time?
Can't hear you
Does it
now.
matter?
Oh, yeah, can hear you now.
Can you? So
Yes.
good. I won't use this then.
Okay. So it's been a year or so since you've last been on, and so much has happened. But to people who are not familiar with your work, I mean, you've had probably about 1 million people have watched the stuff on this channel. But for people who are not familiar with your work, can you just tell them what you're about, Kevin?
Well, it's been a long haul, over a quarter century, but it began for me on the west coast of Canada, encountering the survivors of our homegrown genocide. Native people who I invited into my church to speak about horrible things that are now being to some degree acknowledged because of the campaign we started. And from that, it escalated. Canada, after admitting to genocide in 2008, and even recently, the Prime Minister acknowledged that genocide had occurred. That spilled over into Europe, and we began a whole campaign there, which culminated in the forced resignation of Pope Benedict in 2013, including the Black Pope, Adolphe Pichon, and 2 other cardinals named in their indictment, all stepped down because of the campaign we had started. And to us, it showed the power of common law courts and citizen tribunals, enforcing the truth to power, and how vulnerable the people in power who know they're guilty are. They run in panic as soon as the truth is ever exposed, and that's a great weapon all of us have. So, in a nutshell, that's what I've learned, and it shows the power of persistence, I think, over the years.
And we had a huge amount of interest in the trial you put the Queen on because of the disappearance of the kids in Canada. Don't want to get into too much detail about that, but could you just summarize what happened there?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, it's fitting we're doing the interview today, because 2 days from now, Friday the 26th, is the 10th anniversary of the death of William Coombs. He was my friend, a Native man in Vancouver, who personally witnessed the abduction of 10 children by Elizabeth Windsor and Prince Philip, October 10th, 1964. William was scheduled to come to London to give a testimony about that. The week before, he was seized by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and according to the nurse who treated him, a woman called Chloe Kirker, he died of all the symptoms of arsenic poisoning while in hospital, not tubercular meningitis like the death certificate says. We have her testimony. We're doing a rally this Friday at the site of his murder, and it shows that you can't do away with the truth. You can bury it all you like, but it keeps coming up all the time. And it was on the basis of that testimony that Elizabeth Windsor was convicted as a personal participant in the disappearance of Native children. An accusation she never contested. Her lawyers, nobody ever challenged that accusation. So that's considered a tacit admission of guilt in the law. And it's had a reciprocal effect with the rise of the movement to establish a republic in Canada, and really in all the Commonwealth nations, realizing we do not have to cooperate with these criminal institutions and rulers.
Who were these disappeared kids, and how were they sourced?
There was, according to William and a second eyewitness who also has died, Jesse Jules, they showed up, the Queen showed up unannounced. And we have checked the records. There was a royal visit at that time in October 1964 in Canada. So it does check out that she was here at that time. William claimed that the Queen took her and him and other children to a place called Dead Man's Creek. She then vanished with 7 boys and 3 girls, and they were never seen again. They were local children. They vanished. And it's significant, that number, because all of the numbers add up to 10. October 10th, 1964, 10 children. It's actually, if you look in the book of Job, when Job's children are killed by Satan, who's testing Job's faith, there were 7 boys and 3 girls. So we definitely know that these killings, the disappearances, had cultist significance. And we, in fact, took a police accredited psychic to the scene, and she said she saw the bodies configured, buried in a configuration. They were killed the same day, she claims, and buried still in secret somewhere near Kamloops, British Columbia.
How common are these disappearances done in a ritualistic fashion?
Well, we go from a lot of anecdotal evidence over the years in Europe and North America, which has been our primary focus of the research in these campaigns. And to take an example, and people can see this at murderbydecree.com if you go to our site, the testimony of Dutch women like Toos Nieuwenhuis and Anne-Marie van Bienburg, who were members of the Ninth Circle ritual cult operating in the Catholic Church. These actions are routine. They happen not only at times of cultic significance, like Samhain, Beltane, February 23rd to 26th, right now, is actually a cultic high point in Rome. And so it's not insignificant that William died on that date as well, February 26th, ritually sacrificed as an eyewitness. But the two dates, the 24th and the 26th in Rome, in ancient Rome, they were known as the festivals of Feralia and Terminalia, where children and animals were sacrificed for the crops, for the coming planting season. And these rituals we know are still performed ritually, including at the San Lorenzo Jesuit Church, just half a mile from the Vatican in downtown Rome. We have eyewitnesses who had infiltrated that, who observed the ceremonies. We see references in Vatican documents to the Ninth Circle going back at least 300 years. Popes and cardinals all expected to take part. So it's fairly solid evidence. And the very fact that all of these top officials were resigning, and as soon as we started talking about it, is more, proof in the pudding, so to speak, right?
So through our numerous interviews on this channel with various guests, we've got this picture of this international trafficking of drugs, trafficking of kids operation run by very powerful people with the assistance of the intelligence agencies. What is the Catholic Church's role in this?
It's a fundamental role. It's the oldest power doing this in the world. It's the oldest corporation in the world, and it's had that ritual as part of it. It's kind of inherent in the Catholic Mass, the belief that that the communion elements are the literal body and blood of Christ, and that by engaging in that literal cannibalism, you're achieving eternal life. Well, that's the belief in any satanic black mass as well, that the blood of the innocent, the blood of children and newborns especially, will give you eternal life. And so there's a very thin line between the satanic and the Catholic Mass. We also know that from former participants in it, that it's commonly understood within the Catholic hierarchy that one is to either participate in or look the other way in these rituals. And so these things are never denied. It's like in the work I've done in Canada for 25 years. I've never been sued. No one has ever countered the evidence. They just attack me personally, which is a classic lawyer technique to not focus on the evidence, but on the credibility of the witness when you're in court and the evidence is against you. So, these tactics are obvious, and they're, I think the whole situation in the world today indicates really acts of desperation on the part of people who are supposed to be all powerful.
We've got 3,000 watching simultaneously right now, and in the live chat, which has gone very active since you've come on, you got people commenting and questioning. So first question from a live audience member is Quadrex. What are your thoughts on Jimmy Savile's connections in procuring children for royal family members?
Well, I mean, he was, it's interesting because when somebody is publicly exposed by the corporate media, the perpetrators are throwing one of their own under the bus. The old practice is you occasionally sacrifice one of your own to appease the crowd and to focus on, the 3 minutes of hate, what Orwell called in 1984. You focus on this one object of hate, and that way the rage of the crowd is vented a bit, and the system causing it gets to proceed as normal. So, I'm no doubt he was involved, but I mean, and I found this in the prosecution of people who worked in Indian residential schools as well. The people put on trial are usually the most erratic or unstable. So people can psychologically reassure themselves, oh, he was just a weirdo, right? Like normal Christians wouldn't sacrifice children. It's that weird looking Jeremy Savile with the funny glasses. Obviously, he's a child rapist. It's like the way people got upset over Pope Benedict. I mean, he looked like the evil emperor, right? But so then you bring in Smiley Frank, Jorge Bergoglio, Pope Francis, even named after Francis of Assisi, to kind of assuage the feeling that the institution is basically okay. We're doing our spin operation now. And unfortunately, many people fall for that. It's the oldest ploy in the world, right? But it's all about the question of the money and the system responsible behind it and how it carries on today, right?
Next question from the live audience member is thoughts on Lord Mountbatten and do you have anything about his relationship with the Kincora Boys Home?
Well, yeah, I've heard reference to that. In fact, Mountbatten was named by both Tos and Anne-Marie when they were at a young age taken to various satanic rituals in Carnarvon Castle in Wales was one they mentioned, in the Holyrood Castle in Edinburgh, I believe, where he was present. Now, it's interesting too. I have uncles who survived the Battle of Dieppe in 1942, when these Canadian soldiers were just sacrificed at this impossible position. And Mountbatten organized it without the knowledge of the rest of the Allied commanders. He just went off on his own and did this and sacrificed 6,000 guys. Now, I believe that that also had ritual connotations. Under the cover of war, like genocide, you can commit all of these satanic rituals. And so I think it's all connected. And I think it was poetic justice when he got blown up in wherever it was in Ireland. They blamed the IRA on Mountbatten's death, but I think there was more going on, because apparently there were children on his yacht with him when he was blown up, including a nephew.
And people were pissed off about what he did at the Kincora Boys Home as well. That's the impression I get. Next question is from Shepherd of the Forest. Have tunnels ever been found where the kids in Canada went missing?
Yes, we've monitored. Originally, there were 28 sites across Canada that we published. Again, you can see at murderbydecree.com. These 28 mass grave sites are at former Indian schools. And on 6 of those locations, we've actually found tunnel systems. We found the most prominent one was the oldest Indian school in Canada, the Mohawk School, where we actually did a dig and found bones that turned out on examination to be the bones of a small female, about 5 years old, that had been burnt and cut up, classic signs of ritual killing, sacrifice. And connected to that was a tunnel system that had been locked off. We actually got into it until the police showed up and shut it down. But we had the Mohawk Warrior Society protecting us as we went into the basement of the former school, where children had described, or survivors had described, subterranean areas, which tends to be the configuration. These are areas beneath churches or schools, sub-basement areas that are linked by tunnel. The same thing happens at the Vancouver Club, these prestigious clubs today that are linked in downtown Vancouver to the waterfront, where people are still brought in false hulls in the ships. All of that, I mean, it's kind of standard operations.
People in the chat are pointing out that the links we've got for you presently are not working. So I'm going to ask if Ash can double check those links and perhaps find the correct working links. You did send some links over to us, and I assume you've not been taken down by the authorities. So
no, I just checked this just now and they're all fine. So it could be their laptops or something.
All right, we will absolutely get those fixed. Now, the biggest thing on this channel has been the Epstein case. It's been about a year since I spoke to you about that one as well. What do you think about developments in that case, and where do you think it's heading?
Well, again, I think Jeffrey Epstein was another case of a Jimmy Savile, where somebody prominent had to be, ceremonially sacrificed in public. And whether or not he's still alive and that whole story, I don't think that's as important as the fact that, a big monolithic system can only react in certain ways. That's Sun Tzu's point in The Art of War, why people can outmaneuver the system all the time, because they have a set protocol they follow, and they keep following it all the time. None of the present measures being used all over the world to control people, no matter what you believe about the present situation. None of it is deviating from their basic game plan, which is you rule by fear and ignorance. and you periodically make the system seem like it's working and that it's fair. It isn't just through elections, but by making it seem like justice has been done, and this particularly nasty guy has been brought to justice, right? Or has killed himself or whatever. But the point is that that's the hand puppet, right? It's like elections. You don't look at the presidential candidates, you look at who's holding their string, right?
So do you think that these arrests and incarcerations of Ghislaine Maxwell and Jean-Luc Brunel, they're just sacrificial lambs for the big players to satisfy the public?
Absolutely. I mean, that's why they occur publicly. That's, it's kind of like the when you get attention, when anyone gets attention in the corporate media, it's never accidental. It serves somebody's purpose. It isn't just the system has suddenly become humane. Like, why would it be? Why would it change its nature, right?
and this story, this Epstein Maxwell story, is the most reported true crime story out there. If you look at Weinstein, Jackson, all the other people who were accused of things or prosecuted, there are more stories on Epstein Maxwell than all those other cases combined.
Yeah.
So there must be some kind of agenda there for the media to be constantly pushing it.
Well, like I said, the system's desperate. It's running out of options. It has to use more oppression, more arbitrary dictates, on no matter what the issue is, because its back is to the wall. And I think we're seeing a real breakdown globally in the system. We like to think in terms of there being an elite and a cabal running everything, but the truth is the system is too complex and huge for any one group to run it. I think they're out of control. Things are out of control, and that's makes it all the more important for we the people to create our own alternatives and not to look for these systems to kind of deliver for us, which they're not going to do, right?
So you're saying that there are groups competing to run it, but it's a bit chaotic?
I believe so, yeah. I mean, Orwell's prophecy is being borne out. There's now, he called it Eurasia, Oceania, and East Asia, and he said they're all vying for power. Well, that's America, Europe / Russia, and China. And China actually just overtook America in the gross domestic product, which is amazing when you think about it. China's gone rapidly, and in fact, has expanded so rapidly that it's buying up all of Canada now. A lot of the disappearances of Native people we've found are occurring right along the area where the Chinese have bought up the liquid natural gas sites. It's called the Highway of Tears in northern British Columbia. It's where all the Native people go missing. They built 14 internment camps along. We've got pictures of these things all along that front, and the Chinese operate out of Port of Prince Rupert. They own it, right? Like they really bind up the whole country. And Trudeau, the prime minister, even the first thing he did when he came into power was he passed the Foreign Investment Protection Act, which allows China not only to buy up any amount of Canada they want, but they can even station their own security troops on Canadian soil, which I figured is an act of treason. But it's kind of like the way Canada operates, open to the highest bidder. And we're seeing all that play out. So I think it's an example of the geopolitically what's going on. And it's the same old game, it's gone on for centuries.
And in response to that, there was a convening of a Canadian West Coast common law court under the Republic's jurisdiction to prosecute Chinese and Canadian church, state, and corporate officials for human trafficking, genocide, and murder.
That's what we've been working on for the last year. When the COVID things were announced in March, got a lot of people concerned, and so we've had a skyrocketing growth in the people working with the Republic. One of the things that we did right away was we said that there's so much evidence on the West Coast of these ongoing crimes that we are convening a grand jury to investigate these things. We've accumulated a lot of evidence, and now we're going to start issuing summonses to people. Unfortunately, on Vancouver Island, where it's the hottest area of this, right on the West Coast, the assemblies we tried to form were all attacked and taken down through standard kind of black ops, divide and conquer methods, rumor campaigns, the whole bit, scaring people off. So we find when you get close to the source of these crimes and you try to organize around it, bang, you get attacked instantly. And that's why we've had to organize kind of off the radar. And we don't say a lot about what we're doing and name the names of who we're working with in that, because the repression is just too severe. But that's definitely, we've already got the indictments in place, and it's going to be naming top people in both China and Canada, primarily for a lot of ongoing crimes, including, for example, the human trafficking. We have more evidence now that one of the generals in China who has been running the organ trafficking system out of the Chinese prisons, he's actually on the board of directors of PetroChina, which owns all the liquid natural gas. And it's right where these bodies were found. I remember early on, 20 years ago or more, when I was working in street ministry in Vancouver, police were telling me that the bodies they were finding of Native women were missing organs, but that got swabbed out of the police reports and the media accounts, right? But it's definitely a connection, that kind of organ trafficking, that it's a huge market for that. And there's any Native person in Canada can go missing and it's not a problem because they're not citizens under the law. They're wards of the crown, which means they don't have legal rights. So you can kill an Indian and there's no legal consequence. Perfect. If you want a source of organs, they're the ones you go after. So I mean, it's all about big money. It's the same old genocidal game, right?
Yeah, and you've touched on an important thing there, the Chinese prisoners' organs racket. How does that work? Is it like a made-to-order thing?
Oh yeah, it's like with the Catholic Church and their baby delivery system. They work with orphanages or planned, like adoption agencies, and they need a quota number of babies every year. So they convince young pregnant Catholic girls to give up. They have special homes where they take Catholic girls and make them surrender their baby to the church, and the baby's then trafficked. It's even called the Baby for Adoption Protocol in Vancouver hospitals. It's a whole market. Well, they do the same with the organs. They have a set number. They get a shopping list, right? They get a list of the organs needed, and then they just kill as many people as they can find. Now, it's easy in China because there's already so many people, political prisoners in jail. Groups like the, not just the Falun Gong religious dissidents, but the Uyghur Muslims in Tibet and the southern areas of China, Muslims heavily targeted for organ trafficking. It's the same genocidal kind of thing. So the fact the same thing would happen in Canada against Native people, I mean, it's business as usual. It's been going on for a long time, just a more perfected technology now, right?
Another question from Quadrex. Has Kevin come across groups close to his location involved in these dark matters?
Oh, very close. Yeah. I'm not going to say where I am right now, but on the West Coast, it's rife with this kind of activity. Not just in Canada, but all up and down the Pacific Northwest coast in Oregon and Washington. I have a friend, Matthew McDaniel, he's married to an Aka Native woman from Thailand. And they had discovered a direct pipeline going from Seattle and Portland directly to Bangkok, where the US military and CIA were bringing in and running child brothels in Bangkok, partly to blackmail US politicians. The CIA even admit they run these places, right? But also as a pipeline for organs and human trafficking into Seattle and Portland. So, I mean, it's a big lucrative industry on the Pacific Rim.
Wow. Next question. Has Kevin looked at organ trafficking in Mexico?
Yeah, well, even more so. That hasn't been a focus for us, but in reading the literature and getting reports from people, wherever there's a big migrant population and a poor population, wherever there's natural disasters or where people can go missing and nobody cares, like Indians in Canada who have no legal protection at all, that's where you see a lot of these disappearances, right? And it creates a perfect fog and cover for it.
Roofman has asked, is there really a warrant for the Queen's arrest in Brussels?
Yeah, well, you can see some of those documents, murderbydecree.com, and then you go to ITCCS archives in that site. Our original tribunal site was wiped out, not surprisingly. We salvaged some of the stuff. It's a standing arrest warrant. As with Pope Benedict, it's one of the reasons Ratzinger doesn't leave the Vatican, because he knows he can face immediate arrest. Now, it doesn't have to even come from us. Any court in the world can issue an arrest warrant based on the evidence from a common law court or citizen tribunal. So they know, even if the rest of us don't know, they know that they are susceptible to arrest. They just rely on people's disbelief as their best protection,
Next question is, who is buying the organs? And let me just comment. My understanding is, for example, if you're a wealthy Westerner, then you can contact the Chinese, tell them, what you need, and a prisoner will be executed freshly that day so you can have that made to order. Is that correct?
That's for what we understand. The biggest markets for it, according to the stats that one of our European groups has set up, is Israel, Britain, America are the two or three largest recipients for organs. And in Europe, it's also done through a thing called the Drangheta, which is the European mafia. They're the ones who provide a lot of the children for the human hunting parties, the things that Toast and Anne-Marie both witnessed personally. The mob and I remember when the first time I was in Rome, I was talking to an Italian senator, and when we were doing a presentation there, and Furio Colombo, his name was, and he said, Kevin, you have to understand, in Italy, the mafia, the Vatican, the government, they're all the same people, and they only care about one thing, their money. The rest is fog and display for the masses. But I mean, it all comes down to that. So Drangheta is heavily connected to the Catholic child trafficking and sacrificial networks.
Florita has asked, are there really that many people that need organs in the world? This is a massive industry, isn't it? What's the magnitude of it?
Oh, it's in the millions. I mean, don't forget, like organs, from my understanding, they begin at 150,000 plus each. A lot of money is to be made, right? It's like Burke and Hare. You remember in English history, these two guys would go and kill people and provide their organs to medical colleges for experimentation. They provided the cadavers. Well, they didn't ask how they got the cadavers, right? It's the same thing on a bigger scale, right? Nobody ever asks how they get it. And look at the rise of disease and sickness in the world, right? I mean, I read a statistic that in the Western world, the second highest cause of death is suicide for people under 35. And that's in an age group that should be full of life and confident and everything. And that level of depression and suicide means there's a huge level of sickness and madness in the world, right? And of course, there's going to be a market, for this, and not just organs, but anything people need, right? The wealthy.
Yeah, if you're wealthy and you need an organ, you're not just going to go on the list and wait years and die. You're going to go to China, and if that's going to save your life, you're going to pay any amount of money to save your own life. So it might not necessarily be the volume of the organs, but it's the size of the transactions.
Right, and don't forget, it serves the purpose of terrorizing your own populace. It's like what George Orwell said about the purpose of war is never to attack an external enemy. From the point of view of the ruling elite, it's to attack your own people. War exists to monitor, control your own population, and that's why, similarly with that, we found on the Indian reservations, there's so much trail trafficking because it keeps people in line. If you criticize the band council for selling off land and getting in bed with the government, your children disappear, and everyone knows it. So if you know that you can be killed for your organs, or you're a poor person, you're walking meat. I mean, of course you're going to not rock the boat by and large. Most people will just go along in that state of terror, right?
Absolutely. Beehive has asked, was Pope John Paul involved in human trafficking?
Number one or number two?
Oh, let's do both because it's not been specified.
Number one was killed, poisoned, after 28 days in office because he had the temerity to investigate the Vatican Bank and the P2 Masonic Lodge that were running a lot of the cardinals. That's in a good book by David Yallop, In God's Name. Genuine Christians don't tend to last too long in the church. I found that personally myself, right? Number two, the Polish guy, Karol Wojtyła, absolutely involved. As a matter of fact, he was beatified, turned into a saint, by either Ratzinger or the present guy, in order to cover up the fact that he was a major pipeline of this stuff from Eastern Europe. And in fact, it's interesting that the American government didn't diplomatically recognize the Vatican till under Reagan in 1982, because they were working so closely with John Paul II, who was receiving CIA money and Vatican money to support the underground opposition movement in Poland against the Soviets, right? And in return, they had free game, like Indian chiefs on a reservation. You play the government's game, you can have free rein to do anything you wanted. So we actually found a spike in the number of reports of children going missing and the trafficking going on once John Paul II was in power. So it's global politics, during the 80s and the new Cold War, right?
Wow. What does Kevin think about the boom in stem cell research, certain celebrities promoting it, etc.?
I don't know enough to say, really. And personally, I don't know enough about the whole stem cell thing. But again, I don't see it. It's like when you understand the nature of the beast you're in, its different activities are all explainable because they're coming from the same source, which is money and control over people. And it boils down to that. You follow the money, you always find the crime, right?
We've got 3 minutes left, so final questions, please. Next one is from Y Yeti. Was Mark Dutroux a procurer of children for the elite?
Yes, not only that, but he was connected to the elite. There was our people in the Netherlands, including Anne-Marie van Bienberg, showed that in the first transcript, Mark Dutroux's confession, he named members of the Dutch and Belgian royal families who were participating with him. Then that all got screened out, and there was a Belgian member of parliament who tried to reopen that, and he got tossed out of parliament, Laurent Louis. He dared to even challenge the official thing, and he got eventually thrown in jail for 6 months for saying that Dutroux was working with the royal families of Europe. So he was the fall guy. He was the Lee Harvey Oswald, and they concealed the royal connections to that.
Wow, one final question, then we've got time for. There's tons coming in. Shepherd of the Forest has asked, what should we do if we suspect a family member is controlled by the system, such as mind-controlled and in denial about the Catholic Church?
Well, two basic things. You document everything and you go public as quickly as possible. You do not sit on anything. For your own protection and to build support, you go public, you go viral with everything you have, and you make allies. And that's why we say to people, it's about self-activation on this. There isn't anyone who's going to come and save you on this stuff. So I urge people to contact us if you've got those things. We're connected all over the world, especially in Europe and North America, to groups fighting these things.
I'm just checking your links out right now. So the first one, my Bitdefender defense stopped it. The second one is saying page not found. And I think there's some kind of hacking or something going on with your stuff, perhaps.
MurderByDecree.com is up. I just checked. And
Hey, everybody. I hope you've enjoyed our series of interviews with Kevin on the Catholic Church, the Pope, and a number of other subjects that we are going to find out what YouTube, the algorithm thinks of this video, because supposedly we're able to say more since Trump got in. This is the litmus test of that. Let us see how the algorithm deals with what Kevin has talked about, because he's talked about a lot of hard-hitting, fascinating, interesting things. Yes, Whitsend, I see that in the chat. Everyone's really enjoyed this. Still waiting for Kevin to respond. He's in Canada, I believe. Last time I spoke to him, he'd been poisoned. I hope he's in good health and he's able to do something. He has had several attempts on his life for saying these things. And I'm hoping to hear back from him so that we can get him on. And also, I found out who the priest was. So I got the documentary name completely wrong. The documentary, put one in the chat if you watched Deliver Us from Evil. It came out in 2006 about the Irish Catholic priest Oliver O'Grady, who admitted to having R-worded 25 kids in Northern California, not Boston, from the late 70s through the early 1990s. It won the Best Documentary Award at the 2006 LA Film Festival, nominated for Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature. And in it, it's disgusting. Yeah, he's in Northern California. He gets convicted in 93, served 7 years, deported to Ireland, gets interviewed. The film presents trial documents, videotapes, depositions, other members of the archdiocese, bloody enablers they are, a lot of them. All these priests protecting each other and getting in high-priced lawyers so these guys don't do hard prison time. Anyway, the summary is that the documentary suggests that church officials were aware of O'Grady's crimes many years before his conviction, but took steps to conceal them to protect him and the church. It's all about protecting the church, isn't it? Not protecting the kids. It's disgusting. So it did really well when it came out. And it was shown on Dutch TV in 2010. Members of a parish recognized O'Grady as having been an active volunteer in the parish Until January of that year, they had known nothing about his background. He had been active in the Netherlands as an organizer of children's parties after serving his sentence. Can you believe it? After serving his sentence, he was organizing children's parties in Holland, just moved country from diocese to diocese. So if you go on, he's got a wiki page. There's a wiki page about documentary. There's a wiki page for Oliver O'Grady, and it talks about his crimes. And I think he ended up getting in trouble again. So March 2020, Sunday Tribune reported he was living in the Netherlands, volunteering at a Catholic parish, identifying himself as Brother Francis. Priest in charge of the parish denied knowing about his criminal past. O'Grady was subsequently dismissed from his positions. In December 2010, he was arrested in Dublin for possession of child videos, you know what I mean, victims as young as 2. Authorities discovered child photos, videos on his laptop, hard drive, USB. And let's guess what sentence he got for that, shall we? After he's already been convicted for having all these other people. The judge remanded him on continuing bail. Part of bail, he was required to sign on twice daily at Dublin's Harcourt Terrace Garda station to renew his passport. 3 years in prison. 3 years. Pathetic. They don't take these guys seriously at all. 2016, The Sun reported that O'Grady returned to Waterford, lived across the street from a playground, and was attempting to remove his criminal history from the internet. 2018, Bishop Alphonsus Cullinan distributed a letter warning residents of the Waterford area, alerting them of Grady's activities, noting that he's extremely dangerous PDF, actively seeking victims in our midst. He said in the letter that the Garda had been informed of his activities. In 2019, he's arrested in Portugal. According to a statement from the cops, he was suspected of child video offences, extradited from Portugal to Ireland, and appeared before an Irish court in 2019. In 2020, jury in Waterford convicted him of possession of child videos, accepted the guilty verdict, was sentenced to 22 months in prison. Absolutely pathetic. As usual, these guys get slaps on the wrist. You know, they're too busy out arresting people, taking drugs, because it all comes from above. Fight the war on drugs, but let's put all this money into this garbage and let the predators roam free and damage all of our kids, because the government doesn't give a crap about you or your kids, and you can just go and complain about it to somewhere else because they're not even going to listen. That's what it's like. And having a kid myself now, it's a terrifying world we live in. All right, so I am back at 9 with Dan Welch. More geopolitical analysis. Tomorrow at 9, we have got the leader of Britain First coming on. You said you wanted more political leaders. I've got him coming on. Wednesday, we've got Harvey Weinstein's Spy. We've got Wednesday, we're filming, I think, from 4 p.m. until 11 at night, non-stop back-to-back shows. So we've got tons of content coming, guys, and we've got a Survivor on at 9 p.m. on Wednesday as well, which I will be doing that one as well. Anyway, thanks for tuning in for the 3-hour Kevin A marathon. All of his links are in the description. If you want to reach out to him, tell him to get his ass over here so we can go live and he can answer your questions on this very day of the death of the Pope being announced.